Hey, everybody. Good to see you tonight. Glad you're here. We're going to have yet another great late night chat here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Glad that you're here. We're having yet another great late night chat conversation. Very, 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 very good. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. Very, very, very good. I don't know why I just felt like speaking rhythmically, but that's what I decided to do. But anyway, we're here and we're going to do just another normal stream, just the way we always do. First, the opening remarks, whatever it is I want to talk about. Then from there, we do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera. Then from there, I answer your questions for the remainder of the stream. So, if there's something you would like me to comment on or discuss in the second half of the show, you have three different options for getting me to engage with you. The first option that you have, if you're watching on the Rumble, is that you can send a Rumble rant. And if you send a Rumble rant, I answer Rumble rants. The second option that you have is you can Cash App me at CalebMoppin22 on the Cash App. Great way to get a hold of me. And the final option that you do have, which is the best option, the absolutely best option, is Buy Me a Coffee. Go to Buy Me a Coffee, Caleb Moppin. Great way to send questions. It's awesome. It's really, really convenient for me. It's just a great way to send questions. So go to Buy Me a Coffee and send your questions. So yeah, it's been an interesting couple days. I've been running around the city. And I guess I'll comment on that later. I'm allergies and possibly traveling very soon, waiting for final confirmation, and all kinds of stuff is up in the air. So, bear with me. Yeah, we're going to do a normal stream tonight. In terms of announcements, the big announcement that we do have is to join the Center for Political Innovation, become a member. We're doing great stuff. We just had a National Day of Action to support peace talks with Russia. Video just went up last night of all the different cities that we were in having the events. And on top of that, we're going to be having an event January 11th. So mark your calendars for it. That'll be very, very important. Other than that, it's just a normal stream tonight. So, like I said, opening remarks, then the roll call, then I answer your questions. Three ways to send your questions: Rumble rants, Caleb Moppin 22, and the best way is Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send your questions. So, like I said, it's been a busy couple days for me. I spent all of Tuesday running around chasing Palestine protesters. That was interesting. I went out to the Bronx, and there was a very small protest happening. And then those same protesters said, well, there's going to be a much bigger protest happening at the Israeli consulate. So after that, I went to the Israeli consulate. It wasn't a very big protest. Then I went to Fox News, and there was quite a big crowd there, like thousands of people there, and 3 different Palestine protests happening on October 7th. So, I walked through the crowd. Very few people want to talk these days because of all the doxing that's going on and all kinds of stuff. But I did get a few Palestine protesters who did want to speak to me, interviewed them. And I will say that the two protests that I covered, in the the beginning of the day, the early afternoon, noon, 4:00 at the Israeli consulate, those protests, were interesting. They were very well staged. They had a lot of decorations, big banners that bring the war home, stop the U.S.-Israeli war machine. Very well staged. Not many people involved. And they had their faces covered up. They're all wearing keffiyehs. They burned an American flag, burned an Israeli flag. And it seems like they were very theatrically kind of LARPing, live action role playing the Weather Underground with their slogan, bring the war home, and, using the F-bomb a lot. Motherfuckers, this motherfucking system. We got to take sides. And I thought that was interesting. Like, why would they do that? And there's an element of there's a lot of media about the Weathermen. The Weather Underground. Weathermen were a 1960s radical group. Students for a Democratic Society was the big activist group back in the day, a very massive student activist group, and communist factions gradually took it over. One faction was called the Progressive Labor Party, the PLP, and they did not support the Black Panthers, and they did not support the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. They thought the Vietnamese had sold out the revolution. So they were one faction of Students for a Democratic Society. And the faction that opposed them published a manifesto called "You Don't Need a Weatherman to Know Which Way the Wind Blows," which is a quote from a Bob Dylan song. And they supported the Black Panthers, and they supported the National Liberation Front of Vietnam. And that was really what defined them. And they called themselves the Revolutionary Youth Movement, RYM or RIM. However, people called them Weatherman because of their manifesto that they wrote. And the leaders of it were kind of national celebrities made famous by the media. Bill Ayers, Bernardine Dorn, Mark Rudd, who was the leader of revolts at Columbia University. And they had this kind of like mainstream media fame, if you want to call it that. They were famous student radical activists, all of them from millionaire families, and they got very into trying to combine the counterculture hippie stuff and the drug culture with student activism. That they would use the hippie counterculture stuff to recruit white young people to be allies of the Black Panthers. They had a very anti-working class approach. They viewed the white working class as quote unquote pigs, as the enemy, but they were going to recruit the hippies to be allies of the white working class. And they also really fetishized illegal activity, breaking windows and getting into fist fights and stuff like that. So most of the people that were part of their faction of Students for a Democratic Society, the Revolutionary Youth Movement, most of them broke away to form a new group called the Revolutionary Youth Movement 2, RIM 2. And RIM 2 was endorsed by the Black Panthers. Fred Hampton, before he was killed, gave his official endorsement to RIM 2. And Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 was people that agreed with the pro-Black Panther politics, agreed with supporting the Vietnamese, but did not agree with the Weathermen and their anti-white working class position, and also their belief that drugs and left adventurist street fighting was the way to go. So the Weathermen, their faction got to be particularly small. It was just people that were very much in awe of Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers and all of them. And they had some like rallies and public events. They would have very violent gatherings they called kick-ass marches. They had an event called the Days of Rage, where like a couple hundred of them gathered and like stormed downtown Chicago and got into fistfights and stuff like that. And ultimately, 30 or 40 of them formed an underground group that started doing symbolic bombings across the United States. And that was the That was the Weathermen. And they were just this 1960s, early 70s terrorist organization, basically. I mean, by the time that they went underground, they were a terrorist group. They were, bombing, and, they made a point of not killing people. They would call in a threat ahead of time. So they engaged in property destruction. And they were just part of U.S. culture in the 70s. And for the first couple years, they got quite a bit of media attention. They would always have a tape recorded statement about why they did their bombings and things like that. But after a while, people just kind of stopped paying attention to them, and they just stopped being relevant in the conversation. So then they internally got really ugly, and it's a fascinating history, and I could ramble about it all night. And actually, my book on the history of the new communist movement goes into the history of where the Weather Underground came from. One thing about the Weathermen, or the Weather Underground, was that they were always a very small group. But they had a lot of resources. And I think maybe that's just because their family were from millionaire, they were from millionaire families, et cetera. But I think there's more to it than that. I honestly believe there was an element of government support for them. That's one of the weird things about the new communist movement of the 70s is the Weathermen were kind of universally hated, right? The communist groups generally disliked them, but they had a huge amount of resources, and they were always the center of attention in the media, etc. So I don't know. And even now, I mean, they most of them surrendered in 1980. Bernardine Dohrn, Bill Ayers, Mark Rudd, they all turned themselves in. There's a very, very small faction of them that didn't surrender. And they ended up, a lot of them were apprehended in the 80s and ended up getting very serious prison time. Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers, they turned themselves in. And because of FBI misconduct, they were able to get all the charges dropped against them. It's mainly because they're from millionaire families, but also there was a divide in the ruling class, and they were aligned with Carter, and they were against Ronald Reagan. And, you get suspicious about all of that, right? And there was this guy, in all the history of the Weather Underground, right? I mean, I'm just talking about stuff that I know tonight, whatever. But all the history of the Weather Underground, right? There's a documentary that was on PBS and all of that. They never mentioned this guy. And this guy was actually probably one of the most important people in the history of the Weather Underground. And he was much older than all of them. And he gets left out of the story because he doesn't fit. Right. The general story of the Weather Underground is, they're idealistic young kids and they became violent and all of that. But there was a guy who was a generation older than all of them. And it was this guy. Right. You can Google him, but he gets left out. Most of the people who talk about the history of the Weather Underground always forget about this guy, the guy with the mustache here, not the guy in the lighter suit, the guy in the darker suit with the mustache. That's Clayton Van Lydegraaff. Clayton Van Lydegraaff. He gets very, very little attention. Most of the histories of the Weather Underground and all of that, they just ignore this guy. He's not relevant, but he was a generation older than all of them. He had been in the Communist Party in the 1930s, and he had served in the Second World War in the U.S. military. And his job had been, arranging for the U.S. government to give weapons to Mao to fight Japan, right? And he got that job because he was a communist, right? He was he was a military intelligence weapons delivery guy in China, and he arranged for the American government to give guns and weapons and airdrop shipments of weapons to the Japanese, to the Chinese people to fight Japan. And then after World War II, he came back to the United States. He was, arrested, kicked out of his union for being a communist, all of this stuff. And then he just disappeared for a couple of years, and no one knows where he went. And then he came back to the United States and was called before Congress. And when he testified before Congress, they accused him of having been an assassin in the Philippines and killing people with a wire, right? He would put a wire around people's neck and kill them with a wire, right? This is a nasty, nasty guy. He claimed that was not the case. He'd never been to the Philippines or whatever, but under oath, he just took the fifth. He did not, he did not answer under the Fifth Amendment, which is very interesting. Clayton Van Lydegraaff, and he was just this old dude who was in communist groups throughout the 70s. or throughout the 60s. And when the Weathermen started doing their bombings, he said, these are the people for me. And he got involved, and he was a refrigerator repairman. That was his job. And he had a van with all his equipment in it that he also used, for making bombs and explosives. And he was quite good. I mean, he was, he'd been in the US Army, and he knew all about how to make bombs and weapons. And he was a very violent fellow. And he was kind of the boss of the Weathermen. He was their ideological guru, right? They were all young hippies, but there was this old guy who was in charge of them. And that gets left out of all of the histories of the Weather Underground. They always leave this guy out. And I think that's interesting because this guy was definitely intelligence connected. This guy had been the official liaison between Chinese communists and the American government during the 1940s, during the Second World War. This guy had allegedly been an assassin. Like, this guy, if there's ever going to be like intelligence connections for the Weathermen, it was through this guy. But he gets kind of written out. They just kind of pretend he doesn't exist. He's just, he's just kind of not important, right? He's not young and sexy and all of that. The Weathermen, as they were getting less and less popular throughout the, people just weren't paying attention to them. And that was kind of something that they figured out in the United States, which is that people who commit acts of terrorism, they want attention. That's why they do it. So they just stopped giving them media attention. They would do one of their bombings, they'd evacuate the building would blow up, and then they would just not report on them a lot in the American media. So they published a book called Prairie Fire, The Politics of Anti-Imperialism. And he wrote it. He most likely wrote it. And they distributed 20,000 copies of this book, and they just, left it all over the country in bulk. And then he went above ground. He was never charged with any crime, right? He was not, facing criminal charges. So the ones who were facing criminal charges remained in hiding. He went above ground, and he launched something called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. All of this history is not in any of the romantic history of the Weathermen that you read, by the way. Right? It's all just, we set bombs and then we turned ourselves in and the FBI was mean to us. They never talk about, like, they had an above ground legal organization called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. Right? And the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee was set up by Clayton Van Lydegraaf, and it was their above ground legal organization after they distributed this book, Prairie Fire, The Politics of Anti-Imperialism, all over the United States. Right? And Bernadine Dorn's sister, Jennifer Dorn, and Clayton Van Lydegraaf, they set up this legal organization called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. And then they called a big conference, like a huge convention in Chicago called the National Hard Times Conference, right? Again, all of this gets left out, right? The National Hard Times Conference. And they paid for it, right? And that's one thing. Like, again, like, they, for a small group of criminals, like people who can't even have bank accounts because they're underground, right? For a small group of criminals, they had a lot of money, and they called the National Hard Times Conference. And they gathered thousands of different communists, right? It was called Hard Times because the economy was going badly. It was 1976. Hard times. The slogan was "Hard times are fighting times," was the slogan that they used. Hard times are fighting times. Right. And they organized protests against the bicentennial of the country. Right. The 1976 was, the bicentennial of the United States. I have a graphic from it that I've used in some stuff before, but I don't have that tonight. And so they organized these protests against the bicentennial, right? Which the bicentennial, 1976, July 4th in Philadelphia, where the Constitution was ratified, was written. The Declaration of Independence was declared in Philadelphia, 1976, July 4th, 1776. So 200 years later, 1976, they had these protests against the bicentennial. What's interesting is the Weathermen were they paid for it all. They had all this money to fund their activities. And their protest that they was called Bicentennial Without Colonies. And every communist group you ever heard of was part of it. The Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party were very popular at that time. Puerto Rico is, a colony of the United States. It's a territory, and there was the Puerto Rican independence movement. There was the Marxist wing of the Puerto Rican independence movement. It was called the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. It had come out of the Young Lords, which was a gang, or like a kind of a group inspired by the Black Panthers that was kind of like a gang. They became the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. And they had their rally, and there were about 30,000 people there. Not huge, right? It wasn't like hundreds of thousands of people. About 30,000 people. They bussed in Native Americans from reservations, which, that was quite a trip too, right? That's a long bus trip from like Montana and North Dakota all the way down to Philadelphia, right? And they had about 30,000 people there, gay groups and feminists and Trotskyists, and they had everyone under the sun. It was like 30,000 people gathered to oppose the bicentennial of the United States. And it was all the Weathermen. They did it. And Clayton, who's got this suspicious background, he was part of it, and they just had a big rally to oppose the bicentennial. Well, on the same day, in the same city on the same day, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, they had their own rally, right? To oppose the bicentennial. And they were not part of what the Weathermen organized. They organized the main rally that was the big, anti-war, anti-imperialist, communist rally against the bicentennial. The main rally, was organized by them. It had about 30,000 people, but there was a much smaller rally of only about 5,000 people that was organized by the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP. However, that rally, even though it was so much smaller, and it happened at the same time as a much bigger rally on the other side of town, that rally by the RCP had a much, much bigger impact. And I have talked about this, in many of my reflections on the period. I've talked about this because, this was the leaflet that the RCP had for their rally. We've carried the rich for 200 years. Let's get them off our backs. Jobs or income now. We won't fight another rich man's war. Now, that's the slogan that the RCP used. And their rally, even though it was much smaller, it got a lot more attention because it spoke to the masses. It had a message that people could understand. Here, I'll put, this is an iconic photograph that people just never forget. We won't fight another rich man's war. And look, you got veterans there in their uniforms, black and white veterans together, saying, we won't fight another rich man's war. Right? And then the slogan for the rally is, we've carried the rich for 200 years. Let's get them off our backs. Right? And this rally, even though it was smaller, it had a way, way bigger impact because everyone knew what it was about. And it was aimed at the American people. It wasn't a collection of different identity politics groupings saying America sucks. It was rather putting out a class struggle message. It's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting history. So, the rally yesterday, the two rallies that I went to were very much kind of LARPing the Weathermen. And so all of this history is interesting to me. And that's why I'm telling you all about Clayton Van Lydegraaff. And that's why it's on my mind. As it seems like these were young, 20-year-olds that had read some books about the Weather Underground. And they were LARPing the Weather Underground, kind of, right? Bring the war home. They put on the masks and stuff. And there was a scuffle. A couple people were arrested. Not clear why they were arrested. There was no one, there was no like violence. But, the police did grab two of the young activists. And there was kind of a polling, match that you can watch. Maybe I'll pull up the video from yesterday. So, it's just so you can see what I saw. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'll stop it and talk about different things. But I can just show you that this was October 7th was yesterday. So this is what I saw in the streets of New York City. October 7th.
today because innocent men and women and children are being murdered in Palestine every day and every hour. Hospitals are being bombed. Imagine that. That's 1 out of every child in your kid's class. That's, maybe 4 out of every person at your friend's wedding. That's 1 person at your family reunion. And this is happening because this country, the United States of America, and its vassal state in the Middle East, Israel, have determined it politically useful to bomb the fuck out of Palestine. And that's what we're here today to fight against. That's what we're here today to say we're not having this anymore. We're going to fight until Palestine is free. We're going to fight until the bombs stop dropping and the territory is given back to the Palestinians.
We're standing here on October 7th of 2025. It's been 2 years since Palestinians broke of neglect. But what that experience is an example of is what every single day people in Gaza have to live with. Explosions, destruction, death and injury. All being done on our dime with our tax money to kill children in Palestine. You believe a fucking word he has to say? Do you believe what he has to say? No. Fuck no.
Now, the protesters took a boot, which they covered in blood, and they used it to splatter images of the faces of political leaders in the United States, both the left and the right, who they hold responsible for complicity with Israel and its atrocities. And as they speak, they're blaming an entire system, an economic system of imperialism, for being responsible for the atrocities and the destruction of Gaza, which the U.S. government is facilitating and carrying out along with Israel. Now, the rhetoric of the protesters seems to emphasize calls for overthrowing the system, seems to condemn the American political establishment and call for some kind of uprising.
UG contract American, U.S. citizen in Israel that are on
PR cover for it. As of a few days ago, the news came out that Donald
the things that Anthony had described about his experience in Gaza as a veteran who inspired by a so-called foundation distributes is nowhere near enough with fully automatic weapons in Gaza as we speak of today, right now, and have been since the 26th of May. They're in the country on tourist. We took the streets and then we gave them back and we went home and got comfortable.
Right. So then, I went to the Israeli consulate. I thought it was going to be much bigger. It was the same people. It was just the exact same people that were there. There were a few more of them at the Israeli consulate. I will say the police completely fenced off the entire street. Like, you could not get anywhere near the consulate. So they're on the corner of 42nd Street and 2nd Avenue. The UN is, if you go further down 42nd Street, towards 1st Avenue, that's where the UN is. And they're just like on the corner here, kind of grouped in the corner. They barely have any room on the sidewalk. There you go.
And every second that passes, a genocide rages on.
The fact is, if Hamas could have freed Palestine alone, then October 7th would have been enough. But we saw when the entire world abandoned them that they can't do it alone.
And I must say, the demonstration was very, very well staged. I must say, even though it was small, look, they're all wearing matching T-shirts. They all have the matching keffiyehs, like covering their faces. This is some pretty well staged. They were doing a theatrical demonstration. They weren't going for getting big numbers there. They were going to put on a show, basically. That's what they were doing. And they were LARPing the weathermen, using dropping a lot of F-bombs, dropping a lot of F-bombs and burning American flags. And they had their faces covered up. And, I don't agree with this style of protest. And I'll give you my opinion. I will give you my opinion after this. But, I wasn't there. It wasn't me. I wasn't organizing the protest. I didn't organize any protest yesterday. So this is what I saw. I'm just kind of showing you what I saw, right? So they're there. you know, and they have a big banner that says "Bring the war home," you know, and they've got their faces covered up. They're very much, you know, reenacting the Weathermen of the 1960s. The slogans, the words, the F-bombs, you know, this is performance art to some degree or other. And it's interesting. I mean, and I don't know if it's conscious or not. I don't know if all of them know that's kind of what they're doing, but I feel like, you know, the "Bring the War Home" was a Weatherman slogan. That's when the Weathermen did their bombing campaign. They said, we're going to bring the war home. Right. And the rhetoric, you know, American people have got to take sides. And, you know, I mean, they're very much LARPing the Weathermen. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. But that's what they're doing.
Need us. Everyone here, everyone watching has a choice to make.
You got to take sides now. You got a choice to make, right? That's.
Are you going to take those risks? Are you going to make?
We're having a protest.
From the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea. We'll live forever.
Say free, free Palestine.
Free, free Palestine.
Free, free, free Palestine.
Free, free, free Palestine.
Free on the shoulders of Palestinian people, of all people who are looking for freedom, who are fighting for freedom and liberation. And we need to carry that torch. Everyone who's standing around being bystanders, you need to be a part of this because this is on everyone's shoulder. How can you live in the exploitation of America? One more time. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine.
Free, free, free!
Air prison, an open air prison. The media can tell all they want, they can spin it all they want, but this was resistance. This was resistance. Israel, go to hell!
Israel, go to hell!
It is right to rebel!
It is right to rebel!
Israel, go to hell!
Israel, go to hell!
America, go to hell!
America, go to hell!
It's a real winning message in America. Tell the country that you're in to go to hell. Yeah, that's going to win over a lot of people. But again, I didn't organize it, so I'll give you my thoughts. I agree with them about the Palestinians, and I agree with them about, you know, opposing U.S. support for Israel and U.S. complicity in an Israeli crime. So I agree with the bulk of what they're saying. I don't think the messaging style is very helpful, and I think it kind of erases a lot of reality. But at the same time, they did stage this very well. Again, they're all wearing matching outfits. They're very much, it was a well-staged demonstration in terms of, you know, if we're looking at it as a work of art, almost as a work of performance art, I would say it was very, very well staged.
One terrorist!
Number one terrorist!
So always remember, for this horrific form of treatment, an end to all apartheid, to all genocide, to all oppression, for the Palestinians, for the Sudanese, for the Haitians, for the Congolese.
As you can see, the protesters have assembled here on 42nd Street. They have gathered. This is October 7th, and they are very close to the Israeli consulate, the Israeli mission to the United Nations. We're here on 2nd Avenue, and the protesters have covered their faces. Now, that's because many protesters have been doxxed, have been threatened with losing their jobs, losing their position in school, facing disciplinary action for participating in these protests. And so the protesters feel a need to cover their identity because of the fact that there are repercussions here in New York City for those who speak in support of Palestine. Now, often these protests assemble with a permit. They have a part of the street that is blocked off for them. That's not the case today. These protesters are here without a permit, and there has been a statement they've been circulating anticipating arrest. So we're going to see how things go here. Now, the police have blocked off the road up to the Israeli mission and consulate, and the protesters are here. They're in the street. They're on the corner. There's a lot of police around. We're going to see how this develops.
Have by and large surrendered. under the so-called Congo. Jesus love you, Jesus.
So this was kind of an awkward moment. I will say it was an awkward moment. I'm sure people that are watching will be amused by this. So they're doing their thing. There's about 15 of them. They're on the corner near the Israeli consulate. And these Christian missionaries, like evangelicals, come by, who English is clearly not their first language. They're not from the United States. And they see them out there protesting, and they're like arguing against them by just kind of giving, saying Jesus loves you and stuff like that. And what was interesting is it's like, first of all, like why assume that the protesters are not Christian, right? And why assume that one couldn't be a Christian and oppose what Israel's doing? Also, the response of the protesters was, I don't know, it was a case of, you'll see the argument that happened. It was kind of a case of two people just kind of talking at each other and not really listening to each other. And I think it was like, there was nothing that the pro-Palestine people could say that the evangelicals could hear. And there was nothing that the evangelicals could say that the pro-Palestine people could hear, right? It was like just two people with a different message who just kind of, crossed paths, right? And it was awkward, and they were unhappy with each other, basically. I don't know. I mean, it was kind of sad because I feel like there could very well be overlap between the two messages, but that was not the case. The Christians were not saying pro-Israel things, and the protesters were not saying anti-Christian things, but they were just kind of, it was just kind of a oil and water don't mix kind of situation.
The only one. He's the only one. He's the peace. Jesus is peace. Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the answer. Okay. Jesus died on the cross for you. And he loves you.
He needs to stand up.
Don't look human. Look at the river. And for God to love the world, that he gave his only one son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have an eternal life. If you repent and you accept Jesus, Jesus is here. Jesus loves us, he's here. He born in Israel, in Palestine.
So it was just kind of like, they didn't even really have to be having an argument. Their messages weren't really incompatible, but their message is free Palestine. Her message is Jesus loves you. And they're kind of arguing, but they're not like making points and counterpoints, right? They're not debunking each other. It was just kind of awkward. I was standing there. It was just kind of an awkward situation to see the Christian missionaries kind of going back and forth with the Palestine protesters, because they didn't have any, like, it wasn't really an argument, right? But anyway, here we go. And the arrests were kind of weird too. We're going to get to the arrests here in a minute. We'll show you the arrests.
Palestine will be free.
There is only one solution.
There is only one solution.
Intifada revolution.
Intifada revolution.
There is only one solution.
There is only one solution.
It's funny. I didn't notice that. That cop was just not having it. Look at that. He's like, I don't like these people. Right? That's funny. I mean, I always give the cops like a hillbilly accent, but this is New York City. We don't have hillbillies, right? This isn't, the sheriff from Dukes of Hazzard. But for some reason, whenever I'm doing a cop's voice, it's always, oh boy, I'm going to get your license plate, But anyway, yeah, but I just love that. The cop's just kind of like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I'm not buying it. Not having it. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this cop. He's just like, right? When we get to the cop here, he doesn't want any of that. No. Nuh-uh. I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. No sirree, Bob. These protesters, I'm not liking it. No, sir. No, sir.
We're here in front of the Israeli consulate. So these people are sick, and they've been starving Gaza and throwing out aid, and these are the conditions that you harass, brutalize, and
press people every day in New York City.
Fuck out of here, bitch. Don't touch her. Don't fucking touch her.
Hands off her.
Don't fucking touch people, son. Get your hands off. Get your hands off. One more time, let go.
Let go of her. Why are you guys doing this? You don't need to do this.
Do not obstruct the rest. Stop obstructing. Let go. Hands off. Get your hands off. Get your hands off. Fuck you.
That took you like 10, 20 minutes to put off. Get on the sidewalk.
Yo, don't twist his arm. Don't twist his fucking arm.
So confident.
What precinct is she being taken to?
It is right to rebel. NYPD go to hell.
Son.
It is right to rebel.
Fucking punk.
NYPD go to hell.
Yeah, I still have no idea why they arrested the two people who they arrested. I really have no idea what exactly was going on. And it's good that we were there and filmed it, right? Because, the cops could, write the report and say, oh, and then they pulled out a knife and tried to kill us. And, how the police do it, right? They love to enhance things, right? Police perjury, Alan Dershowitz and all kinds of people talk about police perjury. So we were there, along with a lot of other media, and we filmed the whole thing. So, but yeah, I don't know why those arrests happened exactly. That wasn't clear.
Welcome! Nazi sympathizers! Nazi sympathizers are not welcome!
All right. Now, at this point, the protesters have seen two arrests. Two people were pulled out of the crowd. There was kind of a push and pull scuffle between the protesters and the police. Two protesters were taken away. Not clear why they were arrested, so we're waiting for more information on that. Now, the protesters seem to indicate they plan to burn a U.S. flag, so we'll see what happens now.
On for 2 years now. When this empire demands that we pledge allegiance to the flag, both the U.S. flag, a symbol of the greatest criminals in the world, and the Israeli flag, itself a desecration of a religious symbol used to shield Israel's crimes against humanity. We must instead pledge allegiance to the people of the world.
Now, the Supreme Court says you can do that. Johnson versus Texas was the Supreme Court ruling in 1987 that says you do have the right to burn an American flag in America. Now, Trump says he wants to give people 2 years in jail for burning flags. That would require the Supreme Court to reverse itself. The Supreme Court did say you have the right to burn a flag. And it was actually the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP. They're the ones that took it to court. It was a guy who was a member of their group called Joey Johnson. Joey Johnson or Gregory Johnson, who burned a flag at the Republican convention in Texas. in 1984, and he was given a 2-year jail sentence for doing that. They took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, technically, yes, you do have the right to burn a flag, including a lot of the very conservative justices. They said, look, it's a political statement, right? You do have the right to offend people in America, right? You can't say something's illegal because it hurts people's feelings. If you threaten somebody, you call for an attack on somebody, etc. But yeah, no threats. But you burn something, now it's legal. Now Trump says he's going to arrest people for that, but then again, that would require a change in the law. And I noticed no one got arrested. The arrests happened before they burned the flag. They happened before that. So, it was, and they didn't arrest anybody for burning the flag. It was all over. I mean, it was all just, that was that.
Now, we've already seen 2 protesters arrested. They did just burn an Israeli and American flag here on the street of the city, doused them with oil, lit them on fire. Small crowd of people here, but quite angry situation, quite a lot of pent-up emotions being released here, a lot of anger. The crowd here is small, but there's a huge police presence, I must say. Yeah. So that was, they just kind of left after that. I mean, it was over. Now, what's interesting, so the police did nothing when they burned the flag. Nothing happened. My understanding, though, is that there is some weird thing in New York City law. So there is International Burn the Israeli Flag Day, right? You're laughing. Somebody here is watching this. Someone here is watching and going, what? But there is International Burn the Israeli Flag Day. In New York City, they don't actually burn it. They cut it up with scissors because in New York City, you can't light a fire. You can't light a fire. And that's why, it was interesting the police didn't arrest them, but you can't light a fire, right? Basically, if you try to light a fire, you try to light anything on fire in Manhattan, that's technically illegal, but they didn't enforce that. There are a lot of laws like that in New York City where there's little city ordinances that could be enforced, it's not clear why those 2 people were arrested before that, but no one got arrested after they burned the flag. So then I went over to the Fox News headquarters. There was a big rally happening there, which was just kind of your typical pro-Palestine rally. The drums, the Muslim American community, the leftists, they were all in front of Fox News headquarters.
Has a right to exist. People have rights to exist. States don't. No, of course not. That's why there's a big dispute. Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down!
Now we're here in front of Fox News, the building owned by News Corporation, which is the corporation that owns Fox News and the Wall Street Journal. And as you can see, there's a very big crowd of protesters here. They picked the spot because Fox News is perceived as being a very pro-Israel network and very much distorting the image of the situation as far as the protesters are concerned. Now, there's a big placard at the front of the rally that says it didn't start on October 7th, and that seems to be a consistent theme among the protesters today, that the events of October 7th, 2 years ago, they're not what spurned the conflict. They view the root as being the occupation of Gaza, the oppression of the Palestinians, and they argue that the lamenting of October 7th events is covering up the real nature of the conflict.
A neighborhood in Gaza dies. None beats every time we alive. Neighborhood in Gaza dies. 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 Every time we
That says, the placard says it didn't start October 7th. Can you explain that?
It didn't start on October 7th because Palestine has been occupied by quote-unquote Israel since 1948. And even before then, the Zionists were attacking Palestine and moving in on their land. And being under occupation, they've been murdered, jailed, raped, and even not given the food that they need in Palestine because of Israel. Fuck that. They were living under a genocide anyway. It was a slow genocide.
Now, do you feel like the Israel lobby has a lot of power over American politicians?
Yeah, I mean, like, they bought and paid for, and that's not okay. And also, people have a right to resist when they're occupied under international law. All that we're talking about here is international law. Israel doesn't think that they have to uphold international law. That's it.
Do you think the UN might take action to stop Israel?
The UN has not taken action. And also, we should never have a veto power. U.S. should not have a veto power. That's it. That's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. That's all she had to say. So hey, I'm glad I was able to go. October 7th, obviously a big day, a day where there's a lot of sympathy for Israel. And, so obviously the Palestinians went out there to oppose it. And hey, what the heck, right? Why not be there, and just, see what people have to say. And what I would like to do, I'm just telling you my opinion. This is just me speaking now, right? As somebody who is pro-Palestine, as somebody who, is critical of the left, let me put it that way. Someday, I would like to organize a pro-Palestine demonstration with loads of American flags, loads and loads of American flags, and a big banner that says, America first, not Israel first, right? I would like to organize that kind of pro-Palestine demonstration. I think that would cause a lot of people to turn their heads, and it would speak to a lot of people that these kind of rallies will never speak to. That's what I would like to do, right? But I don't know when we'll have the resources and the ability to organize such a demonstration. We would need to do it in New York City because you need to be seen. We need to do it in a place with a lot of civilian foot traffic or something, maybe DC. I don't know. That's something I'd like to do eventually down the road, was have a rally that's pro-Palestine, that's not anti-American, right? That is not putting out an FU message to the American people, but is just saying, why are we spending all of our taxpayer money, and why are we getting our government and our country involved in this other country's business? And this other country has done a lot of evil things, like torturing people and bombing civilians, and and frame the question that way. That's something I would like to do eventually, right? And I've got a lot on my plate right now, so it's not something we're going to do in the near future, right? And it's getting cold, actually. Today was actually a pretty cold day in New York City. So it's not something I'm going to be organizing tomorrow. Okay. But, in the long term, I would like to organize something that was framing things not in your standard kind of leftist, hateful way, but rather in a way that could speak to the bulk of the American people. That's something I would like to do, So just a quick rundown on what we're doing. So it looks like, unless things go drastically wrong, I'm leaving the country pretty soon. I'll be gone briefly. while I'm gone on this YouTube channel, we are going to have a number of very, very long videos premiere, and I've been editing these videos. We do that, the mega stream videos. I used to do that on Sundays. For a while I was doing it on Sundays, and we're just gonna, for while I'm gone, we're gonna premiere some really, really long videos. I'm gonna try to get one up every day. I've done the first 3 already. They're uploading. One of them's already finished uploading, the other one is uploading as we speak, or the other 2 are. And I'm just gonna have it's old content, old interviews I've done, old speeches, old, protests I've been to, just to show what we've done over the years. And I've been trying to find new creative ways of doing that, right? I used to have a certain way I did those mega streams, but now I'm doing them a little bit differently, right? One of them's one of them has a catchy, kind of a gimmicky title, and I'm just playing around, right? I'm just gonna see that I want to keep people engaged while I'm gone, right? I can't be streaming while I'm on the road, but I can, have stuff premiere. What I encourage you to do, right? This is just my word of advice. You can do whatever you want, right? I mean, it's your life, but my advice would be to put those streams on as background noise, right? When you're exercising at the gym, when you're taking a shower, when you're cleaning, when you're on your way to work, when you're on your way home, just put them on, right? And it's random stuff, it's just, they're long. Every time I do one of those long streams, right? I get somebody, who says to me, Caleb, why are you making us watch a video that is 8 hours? I'm not making you watch it. Put it on if you want. My advice, I put it out there as just something that that people can enjoy, right? That's the idea. That's the idea. But anyway, so yeah, that's I'm doing that. Kind of gimmicky, kind of, some of it's the newer content, some of it's the older content. It's all stuff that's been posted before. It's all stuff that's been posted before. And, we do this every so often. And so, yeah, I'm trying to prepare long streams that people can listen to while I'm away. And I'm trying to do them in kind of a gimmicky way, but they're really long, right? It's a clever thing. I'm doing, you'll see some of the videos are, and when you see the themes of some of the videos, you'll probably smile. You'll be amused at what I'm doing, but that's what I'm doing. Yeah, so there's that. What else? The other thing is Monday. Monday, I'm leaving Tuesday. It looks like, again, as they say, God willing and the creek don't rise. God willing and the creek don't rise. I'm leaving on Tuesday. So Monday evening, I want to do a call-in show. I usually don't announce those ahead of time, but tonight I think that'll be fine. Before I leave on Monday night, I want to do a call-in show, an open phones show where people can come on and talk about whatever they want. So Monday night we're going to do a call-in show. That is the plan, a call-in show. So if you have a camera on your phone, you got something you want to talk to me about, Monday night, mark your calendar. Now, probably going to stream tomorrow night, probably going to stream, probably going to stream Saturday night, might even stream Sunday night. Sometimes I don't but it might end up being that I stream on Sunday night. But Monday night, my goal is Monday night before I leave town, I do a call-in show where people can call in and talk about whatever's on their mind. I'll be gone for a bit, but I'll be back pretty quick. It should be a quick trip. And when I'm back, we'll just proceed as usual. And I'm hoping that we will have the, I'm hoping that we will have the what do you call it? The registration for our January 11th event available by the time very soon. It's kind of annoying me that I don't have the registration done. I'm, negotiating with the venue and negotiating with the person who's negotiating with the venue, but I would really like to just have the contract signed, have the reservation, and then we can start registering people, because that event's going to be really important. The musician is booked, good friend of mine, great musician, is going to be there. We will have a buffet at the event. Food is an expense. It is pricey to feed a big group of people, especially if, you have to get the food from the venue. Then they have you as kind of a captive market, so they can charge you whatever they want for the food. But I figured the way the event is going to go on January 11th, it's going to be, there'll be a first session with music and speeches and stuff like that. And then we're going to have dinner. And then we're going to have a Q&A session that evening. And I figured if people are going to stay, they need to be well fed. And I can't just be like, see ya, because people won't come back. Right. I mean, and that's, if we expect people to stick around all day and stay for an evening session, they got to have some food. So we're going to have a buffet of food for people who come to the event. It is going to be free to attend the event on January 11th. But you'll have the option of giving a donation, right? If you want to offset the cost, because it's going to set us back. I mean, it's going to be a couple $1,000 and then some in order to, to put on this event, but it's worth, we need to do it. We need to just have a New Year event, New Year themed event, January 11th. And various CPI members are coming in from out of town, to help us put on the event. And it's going to be a great, great event. We want to have a decent crowd of people there. So I need to start promoting. That's why I need to get the thing going. And I just wish, things take time. It's only October. I'm reminding myself it's a long way from January, but it would be good to get this all nailed down and be ready to move ahead on that. That would be nice. So, I'm just, I've got that on my mind. I'll be giving quite a dynamic presentation. I've already started working on the presentation, and the presentation that I give is going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. And we're going to announce the plans for the coming year. CPI is going to be doing quite a bit of stuff in 2026, and, a lot of things will be in motion at that time. And so that'll be what we do in January. Now, between now and January, obviously, CPI, we're continuing to have our meetings. And, we're making various plans, and, so I'll be traveling. We just had a National Day of Action, October 4th, for peace with Russia. And, a lot of things are up in the air. This has been an interesting time. We are learning what we are capable of and how we can intervene in the political process, and we are exercising our strength. And that's kind of what we're doing in these times. I'm going to continue with the opening remarks for a bit. I see a couple people already sent questions for the second half, and I do appreciate that. I really, really do. I really, really do appreciate that. And I will be answering those questions. If you do have a question for the second half of the show, there are 3 ways to send it. Rumble Rants. You can cash at me at CalebMoppin22, or the best way, the absolute best way, is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the absolute best way to send, a question for me to answer in the second half of the show. So, before we go to the roll call and I start answering questions, we can talk about some other stuff, right? There's a couple other things that we can go over. Why not, right? There's some things that are always on my mind. I will say that, the peace deal, that is big news. That's very, very big news, the peace deal. And, my feelings are mixed. The idea that we won't be at war, that the bombing of Gaza will stop, I like. The idea of, Gaza being taken over by this new body, I'm not thrilled about. I guess Hamas has agreed to that. That's interesting. There's a lot of questions that I have about the new peace deal. I'll just be honest with you all. There's just a lot of questions there. But as of now, Hamas is going for it. Russia is going for it. So, if they were in a position to reject it, they probably would. It certainly has taken a long time for this deal to be agreed to. So at this point, I can just hope for the best with this deal. That's all we can do. I hope for the best. And I mean, to hear Russia say they support it, to hear Hamas even say they support it, Hamas is agreeing to it, right? I mean, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I mean, and Israel has killed the negotiators so many times. They've killed the negotiators so many times. So many times someone's been negotiating a deal and then they kill the negotiator. So, it looks like now there is, a deal in effect. There's also a lot of concern that the USA may attack Iran again. And that's related to the nuclear issue and Iran not cooperating with the IAEA. I mean, things are in a not good spot. And this is a kind of thing that we've talked about on these streams before. We're in kind of a trying moment on the international stage, right? Things are not good. And for our organization, we were overjoyed that Kamala Harris was defeated at the polls. We were overjoyed that Trump won the election on a platform of ending the Ukraine war. And the Ukraine war continues. We're not thrilled about that. There have been some developments that look like they might lead to peace. The indictment of James Comey, the Russiagate files being revealed, the raid on John Bolton's home, all of that indicates that there could potentially be an end to the Ukraine war. There could potentially be the Trump administration moving against the war makers and the neocons. It's possible, but it hasn't happened yet. And right now, the weapons are flowing to Ukraine. That's not good. Right now, Iran is being threatened. Venezuela is being threatened. Right now, I'm not liking what I'm seeing. And the economy has not gotten better. I'll say that. I don't know. Some Trumpers seem to think the economy is getting better. I'm not seeing it. So there's that. I mean, there's not much more to say about it. I mean, the ICE thing, now I'm starting to hear reports that it wasn't as bad as what they said it was. But I mean, I know people in Chicago, they're terrified, right? They're terrified. People that are documented citizens, legally in the country, born here, are terrified to have their kids go outside, fear their kids might be abducted by ICE. That's awful. That's not a good situation. I'm hearing, mixed things about the raid on this building, and some people saying that the raid was justified. And I don't know what to believe about that. I really don't know what to believe. And, I mean, we're in a weird spot. And I guess I could ramble about it all night. But I can just tell you all that in times like these, we just have to remember that CPI is the answer. And it's kind of like when I showed the video of North Korea before. North Korea just keeps going, right? The rest of the world can be acting crazy. The rest of the world can be going wild, but North Korea says, look, we're got 5-year plans. We're going to build new housing, etc. So there's a couple other things I did want to show. First of all, I think, a couple other things I did want to show tonight, if I can find them. Yeah, a couple other things. Well, you know what? I think I am going to put on, some music. Then we'll do the roll call. And then I'll answer people's questions. I will say I am having allergies like you wouldn't believe. My face is red. My face is burning right now. I got to tell you, my face is on fire. It's ragweed. Whee! My face is on fire. And so, I'm just getting on here and I'm seeing the international situation and not thrilled about it. And I'm seeing was chasing around Palestine protesters yesterday or the day before yesterday, and then I was in the city doing another story yesterday, and here I am, and I might be traveling next week. I said I'm traveling next week, God willing. So just to mention this, I'll just mention this before we put on some music, and then we have our break, right? And also, by the way, if you do have a question for the next half of the show, you can buy me a coffee. That is the best way. The absolute best way to send questions is via buy me a coffee. That's the best way to send questions. I'll just throw this out there. That phrase that I said, God willing, right? In Islam, part of the Islamic tradition is if you say something's gonna happen, you're supposed to say inshallah after you say it, and that means if God wills it, right? That's how the Islamic way of doing things, right? You're not supposed to say that something will happen without acknowledging that God has the power to prevent it. So you're supposed to say this will happen inshallah. And in the English language, people say it's not required, generally. Americans generally, Christians are not required to say God willing. Oh. Hold on. Someone's texting me. Got many things going on. But generally in the English language, we don't say, God willing. But, in the Old English, people say, well, if God wills it, this will happen, etc. There is a very, very big controversy in the United States. It's not as big as it used to be. But it was a very, very big controversy when I was in high school, and I'm sure there's people that are still mad about it. The U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. The U.S. Pledge of Allegiance has in it a phrase, one nation under God. Right? Now, when I was a kid, every day we would say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, originally, the Pledge of Allegiance did not have the phrase, one nation under God, in it. It just said, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. However, the phrase, one nation under God, comes from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And he said in the Gettysburg Address, we're one nation under God, indivisible. Now, if you look at the context of the Gettysburg Address, what Lincoln was saying, and this is very important, Lincoln was not saying that we are one nation of religious people. He was saying one nation, and if God wills it, we won't be divided. The phrase under God was inshallah. He was saying, God willing, indivisible, because at the time the country was facing a civil war. The South was trying to divide the country. And Abraham Lincoln was saying, and if God wills it, we won't be divided. We're not dividable. That's what he was saying. It was inshallah. He was saying one nation with under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's what he was saying. So when they wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, they didn't put that in there because we'd already won the war. And so we were indivisible. So indivisible. End of the story, right? End of story, right? Indivisible. It was added during the 1950s by the Knights of Columbus. Now, the Knights of Columbus are a Roman Catholic fraternal organization. It was very anti-communist. And because communism was the enemy in the Cold War, they had a petition to add "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, and they were successful. And Congress passed it, and the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance added the phrase "under God." And they wanted that to be added as a statement of opposition to godless communism. And so it was added. Then later, there was a lot of controversy because atheists, there was an atheist, I believe in Texas, who said that it violated his daughter's rights because it was government endorsement of religion, right? That the school was facilitating everyone getting up and making a religious statement. And the government, under our Constitution, is supposed to be neutral on religious matters. And he said, look, this is a violation, right? And that's why prayer in school was outlawed by the Supreme Court. Is they said, look, we don't, as a society, government institutions, federal government institutions in particular, cannot endorse religion, right? They can't oppose it, and they can't violate anyone's right to practice, but they also can't endorse it, right? That's the idea of separation of church and state. And the idea was that this was a violation of separation of church and state. Now, ultimately, the Supreme Court declined to rule on the matter because they argued that basically the guy didn't have, he was not, somehow he didn't have custody, or somehow the guy didn't have the right to make the lawsuit, is basically. So the Supreme Court ended up not ruling on it. But it was a thing that people got very, very fired up about. It was a culture war, basically. It was, oh my God. And there were all these yard signs. I would see "One Nation under God." Everyone was so fired up. Oh my goodness, how dare they, how dare they do that? Now, John is right. Jehovah's Witnesses don't say any of it. And that's because Jehovah's Witnesses do not salute They do not salute, and they do not serve in the military. They do not vote. They do not acknowledge any state, right? They do not pledge loyalty to any state. They interpret the New Testament as arguing that one cannot be loyal to any state. And that's why Hitler put them in concentration camps, was because they were not loyal to the German state. And so Jehovah's Witnesses won't do any of that. And there are some other religious groups that won't also. I believe some black nationalist groups, the kids will not stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I think the Nation of Islam, but I could be wrong about that. But generally, there are people that don't participate in the Pledge of Allegiance for religious reasons, and we allow that, right, in the United States. But the feeling was that this was government endorsement of religion, and that it was a violation. The Supreme Court decided not to rule. What I found to be interesting was that, first of all, the author of the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance was a guy named Francis Bellamy. And Francis Bellamy was a Baptist minister and a socialist. People don't know about this, but Francis Bellamy, he was a Baptist minister in Boston who was a socialist. And his cousin was Edward Bellamy, the science fiction writer who wrote the best-selling socialist novel Looking Backward, which I read in high school. It's a great book. It's about this guy who lives in 1887, and he's having trouble sleeping, so he hires a hypnotist, and the hypnotist hypnotizes him, and he goes to sleep, and then he wakes up in the year 2000, and America is a socialist utopia. And it's all about how America became this like socialist utopia. And it's also a love story. He's in love with this woman, and I don't know. It's a sci-fi novel basically about how America became a socialist country by Edward Bellamy. Well, his cousin was a pastor in Boston who gave sermons advocating socialism in Boston. He was considered to be a rabble rouser, Francis Bellamy. So he was then kicked out of. They basically forbid him. They had a court order forbidding him from preaching in Boston. So he moved to Florida, to Tampa, Florida, from what I understand, and he preached in Tampa, Florida. And so he was pastor in Tampa, Florida, but he had a problem in Tampa, Florida, which was he didn't believe in racial segregation. And he wanted the blacks and whites to sit together in his church. But there was a law in Florida back then. Florida was part of the South. There was actually a law that said that you had to have a wire down the middle separating the black people from the white people in your church. And so he had an issue there. But the main thing about Francis Bellamy, he was a socialist. He was an anti-racist. He was a Baptist minister. Francis Bellamy was also the owner of a flag company. He owned a flag company, right? Why not, right? And he owned a flag company, and he and his flag company had a really good idea that in order to sell flags, to have all the schools in America buy flags, they should invent a Pledge of Allegiance to have school children do. So that's where the Pledge of Allegiance came from, is there was this socialist Baptist minister who was kicked out of Boston and moved to Florida. And he had a flag company, and he had the great idea, why don't we have a Pledge of Allegiance? A Pledge of Allegiance, to make all the schools buy flags. Kind of funny. However, where did he get the words? Now, this is very interesting, right? And this was an aspect of the Pledge of Allegiance that I'd never heard. And I learned this. This is like the third layer of the Pledge of Allegiance of the United States. Is that where did he get the words for the Pledge of Allegiance? He got them from the oath that former Confederate soldiers were forced to take in order to get their voting rights back. Little known fact, if you read the Constitution, you can lose your right to vote if you engage in insurrection against the American government, right? If you take up arms against the American government, you can have your right to vote taken away. So technically, after the Civil War, everyone who fought for the Confederates could have lost their right to vote forever. And they did that for the first little bit. And that's why you have like the first black member of Congress and the first black, that was all, Reconstruction. You had all these black elected officials because none of the white men could vote because they'd all fought for the Confederacy. But as Reconstruction was wrapping up, they started giving Confederate soldiers their rights to vote back. But in order to do that, they had to take an oath of allegiance to the American government to make clear, okay, you can vote again, but, you have to take an oath of allegiance. And that's where the words of the Pledge of Allegiance came from. It came from the various oaths that they had to take. And if you listen to the Pledge of Allegiance, the oaths, it's very much a giant FU to the Confederates. That's basically what the Pledge of Allegiance is, right? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, not two, one nation, under God, indivisible, meaning, you can't separate. No, you cannot. Indivisible, with liberty, no slaves, and justice, no slaves, for all, no slaves. It's basically just a giant, it's like imagine you're like twisting the arm of the Confederate, That's basically what it is. You're twisting their arm and say, uncle, basically. We'll let you vote, but you've got to take an oath that says the country is indivisible. It's one nation, not two, and it's never going to divide. And you can't have slaves, and you can't have slaves, and you can't have slaves. That's basically what the Pledge of Allegiance is. It's actually not so bad. I kind of hated it when I was a kid. I look at it now. It's like, hey, it was written by a socialist Baptist minister. That's pretty cool, right? He was a socialist Baptist minister who was kicked out of preaching in Boston because he was so radical. And then he was anti-racist in the South when that wasn't cool. And the words themselves are actually taken from, a very anti-Confederate thing. I can dig it. I can dig it. I can dig it, as they say. I can dig it. So, yeah, there you go. I think the Pledge of Allegiance is kind of neat. I do recommend checking out Edward Bellamy. And in our textbook that we wrote, We Are City Builders, we actually have Edward Bellamy. He wrote a short story that is very, very good. Maybe one of these days I'll read it on this stream. It's called The Parable of the Water Tank. And it is an analogy for overproduction. And it's a socialist, fairy tale, I guess. It's called The Parable of the Water Tank. And it's very, very good. And it's a great piece of socialist writing published in 1897. The Parable of the Water Tank. And we published it in our first textbook as a way of kind of explaining what socialism is, and it just explains the problem of poverty created by abundance, and why poverty amid plenty is built into the profit system. The Parable of the Water Tank. So maybe one of these days I will read The Parable of the Water Tank on these streams one of these days. So on that note, folks, now that we've talked about the Pledge of Allegiance, I'm going to put some music on. I'm going to put the German melody on, the German socialist songs by Cardew. And then after that, we'll do the roll call, and then I'll answer any questions. If you got questions, send me buy me a coffee and make my night. All right, some music, then we'll do the roll call, and then we'll answer questions.
He was out in front, his fist was raised to strike them. Brigades were growing thick and fast to take the battle forward. The flag was red and the fight was on. For our sturdy comrade Tailman, raise your fist. Sound the alarm. The phony court has sentenced him to perish. But when the people of the world rise up to liberation, we'll snatch the axe that falls on him. For our sturdy comrade Tailman, raise your fist. Dimitrov was in justice, but the traitors thought they had him. But news was spread at lightning speed, and world opinion freed him. The world awakes, indignation flames. For our sturdy comrade Tailman, raise your fist.
Spanish heaven spread their brilliant starlight high above our trenches in the plain. From the distance, morning comes to greet us, calling us to battle once again. Far off in the home, get ready we stand. We're fighting and winning for you. Freedom! We'll not yield to Franco's fascists. So the bullets fall like sleet. To stand those peerless men are comrades, and for us there can be no retreat. Up in the home, get ready we stand. We're fighting and winning for you. Drums, ready the bayonets, forward march, victory our reward. Let our scarlet banners smash their columns, Town battalion ready, forward march. And just because he's human, a man would like a little bite to eat. He wants no rule and a lot
All right. All right. We're back. We're back. And woo. All right. So yeah, let's just do the roll call. Names and locations, names and locations. Then I'll start answering people's questions. We'll just go from there. That's all we can do. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Gabby in Chicago. Welcome, Gabby. Welcome, welcome. Philip in the house, Brooklyn. Welcome, welcome. Alex in Brazil. St. David's, Bermuda. Welcome. Ryan in Kansas City. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? A rose just as sweet. Aw. Jenny in Cincinnati. John in Florida. BJ Baracus in California. Tavis Gibbons in New Hampshire. Marco in Serbia. Patch in Arizona. The Berlin Wall, Checkpoint Charlie. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? John McCarthy in Chicago. Thank goodness. Yeah, for some reason there was an issue, but John is all good. Patrick in Maine. Shout out to you, Patrick. Hemp Car. Jacob in Wisconsin. Patrick, one of these days, Noah and I have got to go up to Maine. We got to visit the Wilhelm Reich Museum. I didn't realize there was a museum for Wilhelm Reich in Maine, but there is. However, it's not going to be open again until July of 2026. So it's going to be a long time. But sometime, Noah and I and you, we've all got to go visit the Wilhelm Reich Museum, because I've talked about Wilhelm Reich and laughed about him on these streams about being a kooky guy. But, he has a museum in your state. There's a whole museum for Wilhelm Reich. So I think we're going to have to go up there and see the Wilhelm Reich Museum. Why not, right? Have you ever been to the Wilhelm Reich Museum, Patrick? I never have. I didn't know it existed until this afternoon. I was looking at stuff and I found out that the Wilhelm Reich Museum exists in Maine. And I thought, I have got to see the Wilhelm Reich Museum. If there's a whole museum about a guy who wrote The Mass Psychology of Fascism, I have got to go. I've got to get the Wilhelm Reich Museum tour. I've just got to do it, right? I just, there's no way I cannot go to the Wilhelm Reich Museum. So one of these days, you, me, Noah, maybe anybody else who wants to come along, we will, it's not open very often, right? I looked it up. They've got a website, Wilhelm Reich Museum. It's in Maine. And I had no idea that it existed. It's in Rangeley, Maine, the home of the Wilhelm Reich Museum. Yeah, WilhelmReichMuseum.org. There is a museum for Wilhelm Reich in Rangeley, Maine. Have you ever been to Rangeley, Maine, Patrick? I've never been to Rangeley, Maine. I've never been to Maine. I've never been to your state. But yeah, the Wilhelm Reich Museum, you can go there and you can learn. I feel like I would have a great, great time at the Wilhelm Reich Museum. Even though I don't like Wilhelm Reich, even though I find him someone I don't agree with, I feel like I would have an amazing time at his museum. I feel like it would be one of these like quirky, weird, places that I would really have a good time going. So one of these days, I will plan an outing to the Wilhelm Reich Museum in Rangeley, Maine, right? Rangeley, Maine. I don't know where Rangeley, Maine is, but I don't know if that's close to Patrick or far away from him. Maine is quite a big state. It's not a small state. But in Rangeley, Maine, they have the Wilhelm Reich Museum. So that is now on my list of places to go. Field trip, exactly. I am going to go to the Wilhelm Reich Museum. And you're welcome to come with me, Patrick. They say they recommend children under 12 not go there, which makes sense, right? Because it's apparently, Wilhelm Reich was a little bit R-rated, as you all know. So, might be scandalous. So no children under 12. Yeah, it's, yeah, is this a sponsored segment? Yeah, right. Yeah, the Wilhelm Reich Institute paid me to talk about it. Well, if it was a sponsored segment, they would have me promote them closer to a time when they're open, right? They're only open. They're not open again until July of 2026. So, yeah. So, yeah. In the northern end of Maine. Okay. Yeah. There you go. So I don't know. I think it would be fun, but what do I know? What do I know? All right. So we're going to start answering questions. As I mentioned before, there are 3 ways to send questions. You can send them as Rumble Rants. You can send them as Cash App, which is how Gabby sent her question. But the best way, the absolute best way to send your question, the absolute best way to send your question, yes, day trip. There we go. The best way to send your question is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee. So yes. No, a day trip. Yeah, let's make it a day trip. Let's do it. The Wilhelm Reich Museum, why not, right? Wow. Hey, anyway, yeah, you can send buy me a coffee is the best way to send your question. Buy me a coffee. Night trip. Wow. You're mysterious. No, I have the Mass Psychology of Fascism book here. I'm tempted to reopen it, and reread it because I've referenced it so often on these streams. I'm tempted to reread it. I find psychoanalysis to be very interesting. I'm very influenced by Freudian thought. So, and Wilhelm Reich is one of these like spin-offs of Freud, one of these weird spin-offs of Freud. So there we go. All right. Okay, folks. All right. So now we're going to answer questions. Boom, boom, boom. We're going to answer questions. And thank you to everyone who's bought a coffee. The first coffee came from John McCarthy, and he said it is Chairman Yeshitala, right? It's Chairman Omali Yeshitala, and his wife's birthday today. They have the same birthday. Isn't that wild? But Chairman Omali Yeshitala, it is his birthday today. And I really do have deep, deep admiration for Chairman O'Malley. I really do. He's 80 years old in an amazing physical condition. He is one of the most dedicated leaders. He holds a group of people together. He's endured. He went to prison because there was a racist painting in Florida in the city hall, and he defaced it as a young man as a political statement, and they sent him to prison for doing so. He was involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was involved in the Black Panther Party and ultimately involved in creating the Uhuru movement and the African People's Socialist Party. A great, great person. And Mrs. Chairman also, right, is also a very great person. And the two of them have built a very serious Black liberation organization that has a base in 2 states, in Florida and in Missouri, does great work, and is thoroughly anti-imperialist, stands with Russia and Ukraine, stands with China, with Cuba, with Venezuela. And we have dedicated ourselves to standing with them against the FBI, and we were with them all through their trial. And it was really an honor for them to embrace our support and let us stand with them the way we did. I'm really proud of all the work we've done to support them. And I'm just proud to see everything they've built. I mean, they've built 2 beautiful, beautiful facilities, 2 Uhuru houses. God bless them. Absolutely. Absolutely. We give full salute to the Uhuru movement for the great work that they do, empowering the Black community, building up anti-imperialism. They are real anti-imperialists. They are real revolutionaries. And my hat off to them. They are great, great people. And on many, many levels, they are great, amazing folks. And it's really been an honor. And thank you to John for all the work that he has done. They have given him multiple awards at this point for all the work that he did as a CPI member to support them. He has been a very, very dedicated volunteer in supporting them. We thank you for that, John. And we're glad that we mobilized our forces to stand with them. We're very, very, very glad that we could do that. So hands off, Uhuru. Yes, we need the conspiracy charge that they were convicted of. We need that to be overturned. We're glad they were found not guilty on the main charge. And there we go. Thank you, John, for raising that case. Happy birthday, Chairman and Chairman's wife. All right. Now, Kate Johnson says, what do you know about the Powell Memo? The Powell Memo was a document that was published in the early 70s by the business community and circulated, basically warning that they feared there would be heavy-handed regulation of the business in America, and it would that the USA was going to implement some kind of European-style welfare state, and it was a mobilization of lower-level capitalists and others against the labor movement and against the emerging, the kind of out of the 60s, you had a social justice movement that emerged, right? It was a lot of people, right? You had the communist groups, but in addition to the communist groups, in California, you had something called the Peace and Freedom Party, and they're still on the ballot, but, they ran for president. Dr. Benjamin Spock, the parenting expert, ran for president on a platform of, like, he wanted peace and he wanted to create a national healthcare service. You had, there was just a lot of people coming out of the 60s and 70s who had a leftist perspective and wanted to change society. And the business community very much felt that there was a threat that, the USA could implement heavy regulations and, et cetera. So big corporations in defense of pushing neoliberal free market policies put out this piece called the Powell Memo. And it's become like a talking point of like Noam Chomsky and people like that. They point to it as, oh, there was the Powell Memo. I don't think that there's anything particularly special about it. And this is like an odd thing that we see. I don't think it's like some big turning point. I think it was an important document in rallying conservatives and the American establishment around neoliberal economics, the idea that the government should not, regulate business, right? The Powell Memorandum, it was just a document urging the business community to rally against any attempts to expand the welfare state. That's really all it was. And I don't think it was a big turning point. I think it was just in response to the political upsurge of the 60s, which was not largely economic, right? It was largely the Black liberation movement, and it was largely opposition to Cold War conformity into the Vietnam War. But in response to the political upsurge, there was a big fear on the part of the business community, National Association of Manufacturers, American Enterprise Institute, groups like that there would be a new wave of regulations and welfare state reforms. They wanted to push back against it. They didn't want to see the United States become like Norway and Sweden. And they got what they wanted, largely. The USA, we don't have a national healthcare service. We don't have free college in America, right? A lot of the things that they have in other countries, we do not have here. Well, that's from the Powell Memo. That's why we don't. So there you go. Not much more to say about it. Not much more to say. The Powell Memorandum is a very big part of why we don't have the things that other Western countries have. And it was a rallying cry of the business community against that. So, yeah. Also, so now Tavis Gibbons has sent 2 Buy Me a Coffees. His first one, he says, "Thank you for getting in the streets for peace." You're very welcome. I grew up listening to Michael Parenti, and he has mentioned the U.S. involvement in Iraq in the 1950s. What kind of government did Iraq have in the 1900s? Right. So my understanding is that Iraq was a colony of the British. And then the British put a puppet king in control of it. Right. And that then the puppet king was overthrown and you had Qasim. And Qasim was like a nationalist president, right. And he was aligned with the Soviet Union and he was overthrown. Qasim was overthrown by the CIA. And eventually you got the Ba'athist government, and there were different Ba'athist governments. The Ba'ath was in power, then they were out of power, then they were back in power. And there's a quote from Winston Churchill about Iraq that is particularly ugly, is that after World War I, there was an uprising of the Iraqis against the British. And the British used poison gas against the Iraqis. And they had, at the end of World War I, agreed to never use poison gas again. And from my understanding, Winston Churchill said, well, those laws are created to protect men, not uncivilized tribes. Pretty nasty, right? And that Winston Churchill was, he didn't have a problem using chemical weapons against the Iraqi people. And that became particularly relevant when discussing the U.S. invasion of Iraq, because the USA, accused Iraq of developing weapons of mass destruction, which they were not developing. But, the British had used weapons of mass destruction against the Iraqi people as far back as the 1920s, if I understand. But yeah, the British were colonized Iraq. Eventually they put a puppet king in power. The puppet king was overthrown, and then you had Qasem, and then you had Saddam Hussein, and then you had the Baathists, and it wasn't Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein didn't solidify power until the 70s, from my understanding. He was one of the Baathist leaders. He was one of the leaders of the Baathist party. He was a military leader of the Baathist Arab Socialist Party, but he didn't become the absolute leader until the Syrian Baath and the Arab Baath, or the Syrian Baath and the Iraqi Baath split, right? And then Saddam Hussein accused the other wing, his rival wing of the Baath party, of being aligned with Syria, right? Michel Aflaq, who was the founder of Baathism, was from Syria but moved to Iraq and supported Saddam Hussein. And the other wing of the Baath party that was in power in Syria, that was headed by Hafez Assad, the father of Bashar Assad, they didn't get along, right? And so there was a rival wing of the Baath party that was Syrian aligned. And when they were accused of conspiring with Syria against Saddam Hussein, that was when Saddam Hussein officially secured his grip on power. And I believe that was in the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. I actually don't know my Iraqi history very well, for a couple reasons. First of all, Iraq is not a socialist country any longer, right? It's been overthrown by the United States. The USA invaded in 2003. And a very, very important anti-imperialist country in that region is Iran. And Iraq and Iran are blood enemies. And Saddam Hussein killed almost 1 million people in Iran. And so to support Saddam Hussein is completely meaningless nowadays, right? I mean, I think we can acknowledge that he probably, he did a lot of things to build up Iraq's economy. He had a lot of programs that helped people, but there's actually no reason to go around talking about how great Saddam Hussein is, because doing that offends and is quite hostile to the main anti-imperialist force in the Middle East right now, which is Iran and the Shia axis of resistance. And on top of that, Saddam Hussein he's gone. I mean, he doesn't exist. And, and he pretty clearly was awful to Iran. And, his policies in the 90s were, pretty bad. He was also facing, the U.S., the U.S., embargo and sanctions. And Iraq is very divided. I will say that there is a very, very small number of people. I mean, I think there's only one of them, but there might be a couple more, who are like weird Saddam Hussein worshipers, and they're completely delusional. They don't, they to worship Saddam Hussein now is like, maybe you should worship Genghis Khan. Maybe you should worship, Charlemagne. I mean, it's like, Baathist Arab socialism as a movement at this point is pretty dead. I mean, Syria is technically Baathist, but the founder of Baathism, Michel Aflaq, aligned with Saddam Hussein. And Bashar Assad is out of power. He's in Russia now. He's not in power any longer. The Syrian Arab Republic, which was a Baath government, is gone. And they were not the same kind of Baath. They were like their own interpretation of Baathist Arab socialism. So, yeah, I just, to go around worshiping Saddam Hussein doesn't make any sense, right? It just doesn't make any sense. But it's a convenient way to be an imperialist collaborator, right? And that there was somebody who was in our circles at one point, just a really unhealthy person with a lot of issues, who did a lot of damage to CPI. Honestly, it's just it's really sad. I was nothing but nice to that person. At one point I said to them, have I hurt you in any way? No. He was just jealous. Basically, he was just angry that I was successful. So he, caused problems. But that person, every so often he would, flip into because he had this fetish for Saddam Hussein taking pro-imperialist positions. At one point, he maintained, and I love this, he said, Iran is a bigger threat to Iraq than the United States. And I said, really? Explain that one to me. The majority of the population are Shia. Iran is Shia. So how is that? Right. And he couldn't give me an answer to that. But, and that he basically, he had this like fetish, this love for Saddam Hussein. And that is what prevented him from being a real anti-imperialist, right? It was like, well, Saddam Hussein is good. Saddam Hussein is amazing. Well, if in the sense that Saddam Hussein was opposing the imperialists, that's a position one could take. But there's nothing particularly special or magical or admirable about the Iraqi government. And it did a lot of really, really evil things to Iran, and it's gone. And so, to be a Saddam Hussein worshiper in our time is silly. It's just downright silly. It's not, it doesn't make sense. I do think that Saddam Hussein's Iraq was socialist, just like I maintain that, basically all anti-imperialist countries are more or less socialist. And that's a position that people find very hard to swallow, but it's a consistent position, right? There are some people that maintain, well, we've never seen socialism. It's never happened because, the Russian Revolution was not in a Western country and it was a Stalinist dictatorship. And those people were at least consistent. I'll give them that, right? That, their position is consistent. They don't support any of the communist socialist governments. Okay. I don't agree with them, but they're at least consistent. However, most communist groups play this game of pick and choose, right? Soviet Union, socialist. China, not socialist. Cuba, socialist. Libya under Gaddafi, not socialist. And the more you look into this stuff, the more you realize, no, there is an anti-imperialist system that came into the world as a result of the Russian Revolution, in which the economy is not organized for profit, but is organized according to a central plan. Countries break out of Western domination in order to build up their economies. And you can call that system, I think Michael Parenti says, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it a lampshade. You can call it a necktie. You don't have to call it socialism, but it exists, and it should be supported against the Western imperialists, right? Now, if you don't think that's really socialism, if you have some, very puritanical interpretation of Marx or whatever, that's fine, but that system does exist. And Iraq was that system. Iran is that system in the name of Islam. They call it not capitalism, but Islam, but it is that system. It is a state-run economy that comes out of an anti-colonial revolution where they have 5-year plans and state-run industries and revolutionary committees in neighborhoods. Cuba is that system. Gaddafi is that system. Modern-day China is that system. So, that system that exists, it's all the same. And that's what distinguishes me. That's really why I'm not a quote-unquote Marxist anymore. Communist tanky groups think that there is like some big difference between anti-imperialist states, right? They think that, that North Korea and the Soviet Union, those are communist and the other governments are not. I don't think that, right? There is no magical class line between Iran and Cuba, between Iran and Venezuela. It's basically, if you're opposing the imperialists, you more or less have to develop an anti-imperialist economy. Now, there are governments that don't become fully anti-imperialist, right? There are like monarchies that will go back and forth and things like that. There are, bourgeois nationalist regimes like Modi in India, like Erdogan in Turkey, but those governments are not thoroughly anti-imperialist. But when a country becomes thoroughly anti-imperialist, you can't not have a planned economy. You have to move in that direction. And the various governments that emerged during the Cold War that were aligned with the Soviet Union, a lot of times, not always, but had planned economies, came out of an anti-colonial revolution. They all were the same system, in my view. I don't distinguish between them. And that is a view that puts me at odds with, most so-called communists, because they think that there is some magical fundamental difference between Marxist-Leninist governments and non-Marxist-Leninist governments that are anti-imperialist. I just don't think that. So I don't know if that's where you wanted me to go, Tavis, or not. But anyway, you had another question, Tavis. What happened to the Jewish anarchist movement, and how did it intertwine with the state of Israel? The Jewish anarchist movement. Anarchism, from what I understand, is a school of Marxist or socialist thought, right? That generally there are 3 interpretations of socialist thought. The first is what you might call social democracy. It's the idea that capitalism kind of gradually evolves into socialism. Right, and that the West is the most advanced, and that the West is, that socialism is an extension of the Western democratic system. That's social democracy, right? That's the British Labour Party. That's the German Social Democratic Party. It's Edward Bernstein. The movement is everything. The goal is nothing. And it tends to be very pro-imperialist because it believes you're exporting the Western system. That's called social democracy. That's, AOC, Bernie Sanders, right? Evolution, not revolution. That the Western system, to be true to its democratic ideals, gradually, one step at a time, is moving towards socialism. That's called social democracy. Then you have, I don't know what you want to call it, communists, revolutionary, and that's anti-imperialism. That's, a struggle to seize political power, right? Whereas social democracy sees capitalism just kind of naturally turning into socialism. Communists and revolutionary anti-imperialists, they generally believe there is like a turning point, right? When a society goes from being run by the imperialists and the capitalists and running by the revolutionaries, that there is a struggle for the seizure of power, right? That is Marxism, Leninism. That's Ba'athist Arab socialism. That's, that's another school of thinking that is thoroughly anti-imperialist, and also there's an event horizon. They want to seize control of the state. They don't want the state to just kind of gradually, one step at a time. They want to establish a government of their own. They want state power. And then there is the third school, which says that socialism will be created voluntarily without coercion. And that is what anarchism is generally, right? And it's hard. What frustrates me is that it took me years to really figure this stuff out. No one just spells it out this way. But generally, there is a third school of Marxism, of radicalism, that says that it's not a struggle to seize control of political power. And it's not that political power, the state will just gradually change. Rather, we don't want any involvement with government whatsoever. We will create socialism voluntarily. And that the most classic form of anarchism is what you call anarcho-syndicalism, which is the idea that that it's just a struggle between the worker and the employer, and we don't want the government involved at all. We're not concerned about the government, right? Other than protecting freedom from government oppression. Obviously, if the government's going to come arrest us or break our union, we don't like that. But other than that, we don't vote. We don't try to change laws. We just form unions to demand our employers treat us better and eventually seize control of our workplaces. That's called syndicalism or anarcho-syndicalism. It rejects politics. It rejects politics entirely and focuses purely on the day-to-day struggle in the workplace. Now, there are other interpretations of anarchism. There were terrorist groups, that said, well, what is needed is a spontaneous act of violence that will inspire rebellion. There are a lot of different interpretations of anarchism, but generally anarchists believe that the system will collapse on its own, and that voluntary associations like labor unions or community gardens or people's assemblies will emerge, and that you will create socialism without seizing state power and on the basis of voluntary activity, without coercion, right? That the state, no one will be forced to do anything. That's anarchism. Now, when you said Jewish anarchism, I wonder, were you referring to the kibbutz, right? Because there was, and still today in Israel, there are these like utopian communities in Israel where all property is held in common, and they're usually farms where every person, they're kind of like cooperative farms that exist in Israel. Noam Chomsky lived on one for a while. Jerry Rubin, a lot of American communists and leftists eventually lived on them at one point. In the 50s and early 60s, there were a lot of American Jews who went there that were leftists because Israel was presenting itself as a leftist country when it was founded. And it was like, oh, we're going to build a giant socialist commune in the desert. The Labor Party, which is the Social Democratic Party, was one of the biggest parties. The Soviet Union supported and recognized Israel. And Israel's original kind of marketing was that we're kind of a socialist, socialist, utopian, leftist country. Jews are this oppressed group of people with a lot of intellectuals and writers. They've been persecuted by Nazis and fascists, and we're going to set up a very egalitarian society in the desert. We're going to go to the middle of the desert where nobody is. Well, there's the Palestinians, but they pretend that they weren't there. We're going to go to the middle of nowhere, and we're just going to build this socialist Shangri-La, this like utopian society in the middle of nowhere. And I knew a lot of communists who, when they were kids in the 50s, went up and down the streets of New York City selling trees in Israel. That used to be a thing. Young Zionists would walk up and down the streets of New York City saying, "Would you like to buy a tree in Israel?" All right. And basically, it was you would donate money, and they would give you a piece of paper that says, "I bought a tree in Israel. I planted a tree in Israel." Right. And that was a thing that, I mean, it was used to be you couldn't walk 2 feet in New York City without someone trying to get you to buy a tree in Israel. That's what young Jewish Zionist kids would go around selling trees in Israel, right? And that was a thing that they did. And a lot of times they thought Israel was kind of a socialistic country. And Noam Chomsky lived in a kibbutz, and so did a lot of leftists, and they didn't like it because they said that the kibbutz were very, very military. Right. And these were young people that were very idealistic, but then they get to the kibbutz and, they're told to put on a military uniform, and, they're practicing military training, and the kibbutzes are very, very closely tied in with the Israeli military. Now that doesn't match already. That doesn't match. Then the other thing is that the kibbutz tended to use Palestinian labor. Right. And that, you hear stories of like, they would have a chicken coop, and, someone has to clean the poop out of the chicken coop, and, a Jew would start doing it, and they would say, "Stop doing that. That's for the Arabs. The Arabs handle the shit." Right. And the apartheid conditions where the Arabs were second-class citizens kind of brought into the kibbutzes to do, the grunt work and the slave labor, to be treated as on second-class citizens. People compare it to South Africa, right? Where, like they, I mean, and even in the Jim Crow South, right? They had sundown towns, they called it, right? Where, black people came there, but if they were there after dark, they would be killed, right? It was just an understanding that if a black person is in this town, once it's dark, they get killed. And you had that in South Africa, right? The Bantu stands and all that. You had, they had situations where there were towns where black people came in and worked, but they had to be gone by the time it was dark, or else they could be killed, right? And, they had that in Israel too, right? That on these kibbutz and all that, they'd bring in, Palestinians to work, but, once it was dark, they couldn't be there. Right. And that, these things existed. And then most, kind of young socialists and radicals who went to the kibbutzim had a bad experience, is my understanding. Also, I don't think the kibbutzim were necessarily anarchist. I guess you could say they were voluntary communities, right? They didn't force you to live there. It was voluntary, right? And they didn't create, I mean, it wasn't like the government created them. It was kind of like people came together and they moved there and they built it. I mean, they took the land from the Palestinians, though. I mean, there's that, right? And they were tied in with the Israeli military. That's not anti-authoritarian. So it's complicated. But, anarchism was one wing of Marxism, right? Or of socialism, right? Or whatever. It was just... It existed. There were a lot of Jewish people that adhered to it, but there were a lot of non-Jews who were into it too. A lot of the, names that you associate with anarchist politics are not Jewish, right? And I think Mikhail Bakunin, who was the big like critic of Marx, who was associated with anarchism, he was not Jewish, he was quite anti-Semitic from what I understand. And he accused Karl Marx of being an agent of the Rothschilds and all kinds of stuff, right? And that they're, George Sorel, he is the syndicalist, right? He's associated with the syndicalist movement. He's kind of, they call him the master of syndicalism, and his teaching laid the basis for a lot of the fascist thought, right? Mussolini said he owed the most to George Sorel and his kind of spiritual understanding of the power of myth and the power of violence, so it's complicated. But anarchism is, generally, if you're talking from a Marxist-Leninist perspective, social democracy is the right deviation, and anarchism is the left deviation. Marxism-Leninism is the pure way. I don't think Marxism-Leninism is necessarily the pure way. What I do hold on to, though, is anti-imperialism is essential, and I do think that anti-imperialism is largely the struggle for state power, right? It's not simply a matter of trying to get the government to adopt your policies. You are trying to become the government, right? You want the government. Now, Marxist-Leninists generally call for a peaceful transition, and that gets obscured because if you read like The State and Revolution by Lenin, he's talking about violent revolution is absolutely necessary and all that. But if you read what communist groups did, right? If you read, Long Live Leninism, which is an important document by the Chinese Communist Party, they said we always advocate a peaceful transition to socialism, but we think it's highly unlikely. But if it's possible, we want that, right? And that's the position, right? It's not that you go around advocating violent revolution. You go around advocating a peaceful transition, but you understand that unfortunately, the people with the money and the ruling class tend to be very violent and tend to abolish people's democratic rights in response to popular struggles. And under such circumstances, people have the right to defend themselves, but we prefer a peaceful transition. And that is something that the fact that that statement makes so many communists angry with me is a sign of why you have to not be a communist anymore, because that is just common sense. Go read William Z. Foster, go read Mao, you don't advocate a violent revolution. I mean, it's just common sense. And if you go around and talk to normal people, hey, I'm joining this political party, they advocate a violent revolution. Most people are going to be like, I'm not interested. I'm getting out of here. But the fact that whenever I point this out, that we advocate a peaceful transition to socialism, whenever I point that out, there's a million of these young communists. Oh no, that's revisionist. I want violence. I want killing. It's like, you guys are nuts. You guys are insane. And that's because for them, their politics is an expression of alienation. And, there's not going to be a violent revolution. I certainly hope there isn't one. There's not going to be one anytime soon. And, anyone who's ever lived through a violent revolution will tell you how much they don't want to live through it again. And, if you are in a political group that is advocating a violent revolution, not saying that one might be inevitable, that's different, right? If you say, well, it looks like it'll probably get to that point someday and that's awful and we really don't want it to, that's different. And that's what Lenin said. And that's what Mao even said, right? Is that it's probably going to get to that and we don't want that. But if it comes to that, we will defend ourselves, etc. But if you're going around saying, yes, we need a violent revolution, you're not a serious political actor. You're not a serious political actor if you do that. You're a joke, right? And that's why, and the fact that that is so much of a, oh my God, Caleb, I need to have a violent revolution. How can you say, like, it's like, this is not serious politics, right? And I hate to say it, and I'm, who am I to judge, right? I've grown a lot over the years, and I've learned a lot over the years. And I was probably there at one point in my teens and in my early 20s. So I'm not going to call you bad names and I'm not going to pass judgment, but come on. Like, if you're a serious political actor, if you're serious about politics, you don't advocate a violent revolution. It doesn't mean you don't say one might happen. It might happen, sure, but you don't you don't want it to happen. You don't want it to happen. That's the point. And the fact that, the fact that what I just said is like, oh my God, if you say that to American communists, they just have this gut level, how dare you? That says they're on planet Saturn, right? They're on planet Saturn. And in countries where they have very large, serious communist parties, they advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. I mean, it's just, I can quote, Mao, even after Chiang Kai-shek was refusing to let the Chinese communists joined the coalition government with the KMT, they still were saying, we want to avoid civil war. We want to form a coalition government with the KMT, right? It's just, it's unfortunate. And there are people for whom that is they just lose their minds. If you advocate a peaceful road to socialism, I mean, it's crazy to me. I just don't understand. I mean, and that right there tells you they're children. They're I don't know. They're wrong. And I'm not saying I wasn't there exactly. I think I had this kind of understanding at one point, but yeah. No serious political organization advocates the violent overthrow of the government. right? No serious organization that wants to at all be taken seriously in politics advocates a violent revolution. Okay. And that's not what Lenin did. That's not what the Bolsheviks did. That's not what Mao did. That's not what any of these groups that have taken power because they had no choice and because they advocated peacefully coming to power and they were prevented from doing so. And, democratic organizations were suppressed and their rights were taken away and new institutions and committees were built up and labor unions and all kinds of things were built up and they defended themselves. And they don't understand any of this. They don't understand how any of this has ever happened before. They've never studied how any of this really happens. They just kind of have this fantasy. One day we're going to go out and have a revolution. And it's like, grow up. And again, this doesn't make me popular. This infuriates people when I say it, but it is what it is. Yeah. All right. So we got one more buy me a coffee that's come in. Caleb, you are indefatigable. You are indefatigable. Caleb, keep up the good work. What does indefatigable mean? I'm going to have to look that up. I do appreciate you telling me to keep up the good work, and I will. Caleb, you are indefatigable. A person persisting tirelessly. Well, thank you. Yes, I mean that's not a compliment. That's a fact. So thank you. Yes, I am indefatigable, and I will keep going. Yeah. So there you go. So those are all the buy me a coffees that have come in, but I'm still taking them. If anyone wants to buy me a coffee, you're still welcome to buy me a coffee. So yeah, I'm. Looks like tomorrow I'm heading out to get the gotta run some errands tomorrow. But anyway, if you still want to buy me a coffee, that's the best way to send questions. So please, the door is open for coffees to be bought. But yeah. So now the next question. So Gabby sent a question via Cash App. And Gabby said, millennials often say the boomer generation was the most selfish and careless, both as parents and as people. They built the system we're struggling under today, but take no accountability. Is that unfair or is there truth in it? It's funny. Somebody on this stream who is a boomer who watches these streams said that I'm an honorary boomer. I heard her say that, and I know, I'm not going to get into details about my life, but that's, I know what she means, right? And that, unfortunately, right, I've spent my adult life in communist groups run by boomers, and I had, I had parents, that were quite controlling of what I watched and what I listened to. And so, boomer culture has very much influenced me. I'll be honest. And I am a millennial, but I lived a very sheltered childhood and teen years in a little town in Ohio with boomer parents. And then I joined communist groups that were all boomers. There were very few young people in these communist groups. So I'm heavily influenced by boomers, so as a millennial, do I blame boomers? Well, it's interesting. That's a big part of LaRoucheism, I've noticed. Like LaRouche was from the older generation, from the greatest generation, fought in the Second World War. And LaRouche has this kind of anti-boomer thing. Like, the baby boomers, they were all brought up with TV and they were brought up with rock music and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they were a bunch of decadent, and at the time, this is kind of interesting. At the time, in the time of the new left in the 60s, the argument was that boomers were spoiled little kids whose parents weren't tough on them and all of that. But it's like boomers actually, compared to nowadays, had very tough lives. The amount of hardship that they endured, the amount of toughness, the amount of, so we're a lot softer on our kids nowadays than boomers were, right? And boomers got drafted. We don't have a military draft now. There was no safe space and all of that. I will say that one thing though, and it took me a while to realize that, is that I always assumed. See, I was a kid in the 90s. And in the 90s, they were always talking constantly. The 90s was a rather conservative time, right? The religious right was very powerful. And they were always talking about, oh my God, everything went to hell. Everything's going to hell. We're so liberal and tolerant nowadays. However, there was we became much more conservative as a society in the 80s, right? In the 70s, for example, my school, we did not have birth control education, right? We had abstinence only education, because that was just, it was the culture. It was a small town. It was religious, but it was also, it was also Bush, the Bush era where the federal government was promoting abstinence only stuff and all that. We had abstinence only education. I found out that in my town in the late 70s, they did teach birth control and stuff like that. Now, that didn't make sense to me, but that was before the conservative pushback of the 80s. Right. And that it's not a straight line. And, you watch, I always bring up, for example, the movie, The Cat People, right? The Cat People, right? You look at that movie, how in the world does that movie get made, right? It's a movie from the World War II time, from the 40s, about a woman who every time she gets sexually aroused, she turns into a cat. Now, in the 50s, you could not make such a movie. They would probably put you in jail for making a movie like that during the McCarthy years. But during World War II, they made it. It's not a straight line. Social conservatism, it's kind of a straight line, but not always, right? People think we're always becoming more liberal. Not exactly. There was in the 50s, we got to be much more conservative. In the 40s and 30s, Freudianism was very mainstream, and we were much more libertine. And movies like The Cat People came out. And then in the 50s, there was a regression. Then you had the Cultural Revolution of the 60s. And then in the 80s, with the rise of the religious right and stuff, we became much more culturally conservative. Now we're doing the woke thing. We're becoming, it's complicated. It's complicated, is all I can say. Are millennials selfish? Everyone's selfish. I mean, there's widespread selfishness in our culture. I mean, part of what's wrong in our society now is people don't feel an obligation to other people, right? They're kind of separated from other people, and technology has enabled them to do that, right? And that, people don't show up at events anymore, right? I mean, of anything, whether it's the VFW or the bowling league, people, why would I do that? I can just stay at my home. I can just stay home and look at my phone all day. And I feel like we've become a very, very selfish society, and social media has everyone very, very worried. How do I look? How do I look? People are always looking in the mirror because they want to show that social media is like a mirror you're always looking in, and you're trying to get validation from social media. And I don't think that boomers are more selfish than millennials are. I don't think that's the case. What I will say is that boomers, what they did have going for them that we don't have is economic opportunity. And talk to some of these boomers, the amount of economic opportunity that existed in this country, especially for white Americans in the 60s and the 50s compared to now, is like night and day. It cost almost nothing to go to college. You didn't have to go to college. You could get a good paying job in an auto plant that would pay for your house and a wife and kids and a car, and not have a high school diploma, right? That economically speaking, it was a lot easier to live. Now, you didn't get to use technology in the same way, right? I mean, there was a TV with 5 channels. There was, but the boomer generation, the stress that young people have trying to find a job, trying to pay their bills, trying to buy a house, trying to buy a car, that wasn't there for them. Okay. So in that sense, right? In that sense, boomers were better off, right? That there wasn't the economic pressure. Look, I hear that, there was a communist group. I believe the Progressive Labor Party was one of these communist groups in the 60s. They started in like 1961. And at one point, the economy was so good that their dues, okay, I can't even imagine this. Their dues was every other paycheck. They took 50% of your income in dues. But if you worked in a factory, people could live off half their paycheck and give half their paycheck to the party. I don't know how that is possible. I cannot imagine any organization saying, all right, give us half of your income. People wouldn't live, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to survive, right? But in the 50s, if you worked in a factory, you had a good paying factory job and you were a communist, you could give half your paycheck to the Progressive Labor Party and live off the other half. I don't know how, I cannot imagine that world, right? Yeah, I mean, people can barely live with their full paycheck right now, so, and good paying jobs are like not there, but it used to be if you worked in industry, right? The unions were strong enough and everything was being manufactured in the United States and all of that your paycheck at your factory job would be enough that you could live very, very, very comfortably, right? That they call an industrial middle class, right? And that there were jobs that paid less than that. And that, like, one thing they talk about is back in those days, to work at a gas station, there would be no interview process, right? And that's one thing they tell me is that it used to be gas stations were desperate for people to work at them. So if you showed up and you said, I'll work, they would hire you on the spot at the gas station. Nowadays, you want to work at a gas station. I've worked at gas stations before. There's a hiring process. You have a job interview, and there's like 5 or 6 people that usually want the job usually. Used to be, oh, you'll work at the gas station, start working right now, right? Construction sites. It used to be construction sites were always looking for people. They could never find enough people on the construction site. So if you were in a major city or whatever, you could go to the construction site and you couldn't do a skilled job. You couldn't be a bricklayer. You couldn't be a pipe fitter, right? Those trades were unionized. You had to be part of the union. But if you were willing to just do, carry stuff, right? Carry stuff around, unload a truck or whatever, they would hire you on the spot at a construction site, right? And that's not the world that we live in now. Right. So that is one way that boomers had it a lot easier, and that became kind of a trope in the media to complain about, how boomers didn't understand. They think their son's a loser because, he doesn't have a house and a car and a good paying job at the auto plant. They don't get it. Right. They don't get it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I will say what kind of defines boomer culture is TV. Right? They were the generation that grew up with TV, right? And I think in the same way, Zoomers are going to be defined by the internet, right? The internet was new. When I was like 8 or 9 or 10, 12, we had started to have the internet. But Zoomers, they have spent their entire lives with the internet. So they're the new boomers in a way, right? They are going to be, boomers are defined by their TV was always in the house from the time they were children to adulthood. Zoomers are going to be defined by the internet, right? The internet was always there from the time they were children. And that's interesting. But I don't think there's anything particularly toxic about boomers. I don't. They're different, but a lot of the boomer stereotypes are not universal. Like, again, for example, right? I mean, I'll just throw this out there, right? Dangerous territory, but whatever. Dr. Spock, right? I mentioned him earlier, right? A lot of the anti-boomer stuff, oh, the boomers are all so selfish, comes from Dr. Spock. You do realize that, we're way more Dr. Spock now than Dr. Spock was, right? Dr. Spock wrote this book, Baby and Child Care, which is a very kind of liberal parenting book that came out in the 50s. And it was almost required reading in America. And it was a parenting book that was published in the 50s that was pretty liberal compared to what people did back then. It said, don't be too harsh when you're disciplining your kids. It says when your kids are teenagers, they might experiment with drugs a little bit. It's not the end of the world, not the end of the world. It says, if your teenager has sex, again, not the end of the world, it's pretty liberal, compared to the 50s when we had a very puritanical society. But you have to remember, at the time, Dr. Spock said all those things. Again, that book was very widely circulated. The government kind of promoted it and stuff. But there was a lot of pushback, and a lot of people didn't get the memo, right? And I mean, many boomers were not brought up that way. That may have been the party line kind of in the 50s. Like there was this book that was a very, very liberal parenting book that was distributed throughout society in the 50s that a lot of boomers' parents read. Maybe they didn't all adhere to it, right? And compared to the upbringing that I had, that most millennials had, and especially the upbringing of Zoomers had, boomers were brought up very conservatively, and in comparison. So I don't understand. If we're again, maybe compared to their parents, they had a much more liberal upbringing, but not compared to us. And they got drafted into the military. We didn't get drafted. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, I feel like they were culturally liberal in comparison to their parents, and that there were a lot of like liberal parenting ideas that were around, and they grew up with television. But I don't see them being especially selfish. I don't see them being especially, I just don't see it. I really don't. And I guess part of it is that, people my age, they get mad at their boomer parents. They say, my parents aren't helping me out. That's one thing I've heard, right? They say, well, my parents aren't helping me out. That's because they're selfish boomers. And it's not because they're selfish boomers. It's because it was a lot easier to get by when they were your age, right? It was a lot easier to get by. And they think, they don't understand how difficult it is, but some do, right? I mean, and it's not that complicated, right? And and in a way, I feel like boomers are a little bit more sociable than we are, right? I mean, again, our generation, we're all just on our phones. We don't care. We don't know our neighbors. They at least know their name. Maybe they assume that it's easier because they grew up in a time when the economy was better, but I just don't buy the anti-boomer thing. I'll just be honest. Gabby. I mean, I'd be curious to hear about your experiences and stuff, but I just don't see the boomers as especially bad, right? I just see them as the first generation with TV, as people who grew up when the economy was more prosperous, slightly somewhat socially liberal in comparison to their parents, but their upbringing was quite a lot more conservative, in comparison to the way we grew up. So it's just different. Yeah, different. I hope that answered your question, Gabby. And if anyone's got any more questions, buy me a coffee is the best way, the absolute best way to send your question. Buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to look at Rumble Rants. Leo Messi says, seems like Europe is between anti-Muslim Zionists and anti-China New Right, AfD Orban and Lapin and the Unstable Order. You see any alternatives for Europe? Wagnecht, Mélenchon, Galloway. Galloway I like. And Galloway has made a point of pivoting away from the woke left, right? He's actually quite conservative socially. That's smart, right? He's just, the left, you can't, if you're going to be part of the left, you're not allowed to be anti-imperialist if you're going to be part of the regular left now. And on top of that, you have to throw down and have a tantrum over culture wars and cut off anybody who doesn't agree. George Galloway, look, he's very well loved in the Muslim community. He's just not going to do that. And so he's pivoted the way he's pivoted. And I like a lot of what George Galloway does. I'll be honest. I think George Galloway is pretty good. Mélenchon, though, is just kind of a leftist, but there's enough of an understanding of regular communism in France that Mélenchon can get away with kind of being anti-imperialist. Wagnecht, Sarah Wagnecht or whatever, she's the German woman, and she's kind of her own thing. I don't know enough about her, honestly. I know she's part of De Link, the left party, and that she's more anti-NATO, that most of De Link has pivoted in a pro-NATO direction. She's anti-NATO. I find her interesting. I don't know that much about her, honestly. She's a kind of an important German politician who's anti-imperialist and comes out of communism. I don't know much about her, but George Galloway, I really do like. The new right, I don't think is completely toxic. I don't think it's completely toxic, but I also don't. I mean, it's got problems, right? Anti-China, anti-Muslim, not very well thought out what they're doing, and they tend to advocate free market policies. And the new right, they're just European Trumpers, basically. They're not Nazis, they're not fascists, they're just European Trumpers. And just like Trump, pro-Israel, Trump, anti-immigration, Trump says a lot of things about a lot of things I don't like. So yeah, I mean, again, we just have to build our own movement. I mean, we have to build our own movement. That's, again, I mean, there, CPI, we intervene, top operations, bottom operations, but bottom operations are the most important, because at this point we just have to build our own group. There's really no alternative to building our own group. We have to build our own organization. There is no alternative. Okay. All right. Reuters, U.S. grants license for Shell Trinidad to develop Venezuelan gas. Official says, what's that? Okay. Well, that's the U.S. government granted authorization for energy major Shell and Trinidad and Tobago to develop an offshore field in Venezuela close to the border. That's a good sign, actually. That's hilarious. That's actually the opposite of what, that's actually a really good sign. Right? So they're allowing an American oil company to cooperate with Venezuela. That's lifting sanctions, granting a license. That's because they can't do it, but they're giving them permission to do what you normally can't do under the sanctions. That's a good sign, actually. That's a very good sign. Yeah, I mean, if Shell Oil is allowed to cooperate with the government of Trinidad and Tobago and do some business with Venezuela, that's a really good sign. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, I think that's a good sign. That's a lifting of sanctions, right? So that's not a bad thing. I mean, I would like this Venezuela standoff to end, though. I'll tell you that much. I really would like it if the USA would back off Venezuela. I'd like them to leave Venezuela alone. And I'm very inspired by Venezuela and what's going on there. And I feel like, again, if they were going to fall, they would have fallen in 2015. They're very strong and they have a lot of support. But there you go. All right. And then Kash Patel is a China hawk. Why are you at all surprised by that? Why in the world does that surprise you? That Kash Patel, a conservative with libertarian, perspective, why do you think that he would not be anti-China? Right? I mean, that's just kind of go-to on the far right. I mean, yeah, I've noticed the Mises caucus of the Libertarian Party is actually pretty pro-China, which is interesting. Very interesting. And that, that's certainly interesting. So yeah, I see Venezuela formally requested a UN Security Council meeting in response to a serious escalation of aggression. Okay. Yeah, the U.S., so Venezuela is, asking for a response to the U.S. building up its forces. Again, all of this looks very bad, but I'm not willing to say it's the end because, again, Venezuela has a lot of support. So, and I really hope that Trump is not stupid enough to start a new war in Venezuela. If Trump does that, that will be awful. That will be awful. But, we shall see what happens next. That would be a really, really dumb thing on Trump's part if he were to escalate. That's all I can say. I've been to Venezuela. I've seen what they've achieved, etc. All right. So any more questions? Now would be the time. If you want to send any more questions to Buy Me a Coffee, now would be the time to send them. If not, I'm going to need to probably say goodnight. So I will put on some music, and I will give you one last chance to send any questions you've got, and then I'm calling it a night. Some nights I come on here and I have a lot to talk about, and other nights I get on here and I just talk. And this was one of those nights where I just kind of talked. I don't know why. But tonight, I mean, it's the allergies, and I got a lot going on, and I'm trying to figure out how to travel and get everything lined up, and God willing, if the creek don't rise and all of that. And so I'm trying to figure everything out. So I got a lot on my mind, and my face is burning from allergies, and all this is happening. But thank you all. So I'll put on some music. Last chance to send any questions you got, and then I'm calling it a night. I'm going to put on Over the River, Charlie.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Yeah. I want to thank Karen and Mark for asking us to play here tonight. And yeah, I'm going to play a couple songs for you. We'll probably play a couple during intermission too if you want to hang out and listen. And any shepherds out there? Anybody herding sheep? All right, this one's for you.
It's called Over the River, Charlie.
Over the river, feed my sheep, measure all
All right. So another Rumble rant came in from Leo Messi. He said, speaking of China, I recommend one night you put Victor Gao's debate with Mehdi Hassan on, just as a demonstration to guess anti-imperialists on how to defend China. Do well. Happy Halloween. Okay. I haven't seen that debate. I'm not familiar with either of those two people. So I don't know. I'll have to check that out. That's all I can do. And and Gabby sent one more question. Okay, Gabby is sending one more question. Here we go. Do you celebrate Halloween? Does your wife celebrate the Day of the Dead? That's actually a good question. I've talked about it with my wife before, and often, we're in the neighborhood and we see a lot of kids walking around in their costumes, and I think that our apartment building. Again, you're not supposed to talk about stuff like that, but I mean, do we do anything special for that? Not really. My wife. I mean, she's involved in some community stuff, and I think that her community might do some stuff. But as far as like, do we do that? Not really. I know it's a really big deal in Mexico. And it's kind of a neat thing. And it's wild. Halloween, when I was a kid, the religious folks decided that Halloween was offensive, right? And so we had to have autumn festival at my school because they said the Christians said Halloween was not Christian, right? And it's funny because Halloween is actually very Christian. It's All Hallows Eve. And I would always point this out to them, right? I would always point this out to the Christians at my school who said, "Oh my God, Halloween is satanic. Halloween is not Christian." I would say, actually, it is. It is actually. Halloween started as, All Hallows Eve, and the next day, November 1st, is All Saints Day, which is the day that, in the Catholic tradition, that's when they believe that the souls go to heaven. I guess the idea was that when you die, you're a good person or whatever. When you die, your spirit is on earth. And then on November 1st, that's when you go up to heaven. So that's like the last night for the ghosts to be on earth, right? I think that's the belief, right? And when I was a kid growing up, I attended a Protestant mainline church. We had All Saints Sunday, the first Sunday of November, and they would light a candle for every person in the church who had died that year. And there were a lot of elderly folks in my church, so there was usually 7 or 8 candles at least that they would light, and they would say this person's name and light their candle, and you would commemorate everyone who had died that year. And my mom would say, well, that's because of Halloween, right? It's All Saints Day, right? And that's, in the Catholic tradition, they have All Saints Day, and that the night before All Saints Day is All Hallows Eve, right? And it was believed that that's, when all the ghosts and spirits are coming out, because All Saints Day is when they finally go up to heaven. Right? And that's, it's actually a very, very Christian tradition. And then people, I guess the reason that Christians didn't like it was because a lot of the scary stuff, a lot of the horror movie stuff is Satan oriented, right? It's about vampires and witches and human sacrifices and Satan. And a lot of the horror movie stuff you could say is anti-Christian, but Halloween itself is very, very Christian. In its origin, it's actually a Catholic Christian holiday related to the Catholic tradition of All Saints Day. So I don't, but that was, in my town, that was another big controversy. We couldn't call it Halloween. We called it the Autumn Festival. And there were 5 or 6 kids in my class who still couldn't participate, because even if it was called Autumn Festival, it was still, it was, oh my God, we can't do Halloween. That's, evil or whatever. That was a big thing, opposing Halloween, opposing Harry Potter books. That was another big thing. The Harry Potter books were, considered to be satanic or whatever. So Gabby loves to decorate her altar. You're like that, Gabby, and I like that about you. You're a very spiritual person, and I respect that about you, and I admire that about you. We do have, when my wife and I first got married, my wife's mother put in our house like a shrine, and we do have it still, right? With Holy Mother Mary and like candles and like Catholic statues and stuff. We do have a Catholic shrine in our house, and my barber is a Muslim, and he always tells me I should get rid of that. He said, "Oh, that's bad." So, if he watches this channel sometimes. I doubt he's watching now, but he might be. So, my barber, I do apologize, but I'm not going to get rid of my wife's mother's Catholic stuff in the apartment. Just not going to do it. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. I do respect my wife's culture and tradition, and if she wants to have a little corner of the house where they put Holy Mother, Mary, and a candle or whatever, I'm not opposed to that. Not opposed to that. That's just cultural. I respect that. And, I have icons, and that's actually a big part of, Khrushchevism, the book, and, innovationism. We do advocate icons. I think icons are a very good thing. They're very important. I do believe in icons. So, yeah, there you go. There you go. I do believe that icons are a very important thing. Halloween decorated Virgin Mary. No. You're way behind. You're way, way behind, my friend. Halloween and Virgin Mary have nothing to do with each other, right? Nothing to do with each other, except they're both Catholic, right? In origin, right? Oh boy. Yeah. Don't you love that? When people get everything mixed up, so yeah, Halloween decorated Virgin Mary. That's got to be a sin on some level. That's got to be, some kind of anti-religious offensive thing to do, but there you go. But yeah, no, I remember when I found one of those chic tracts. You ever read the chic tracts, those Baptist tracts, and it was called "Why Is Mary Crying?" And it was arguing that the Mary would never want anyone to worship her, and that the worship of Mary is actually the pagan worship of the goddess, the mother goddess, and it's a sin and all this, and that Mary, the mother of Jesus, would just be so horrified if she knew that people were praying to her because she was a good Christian and she wouldn't believe that. But hey, just throwing it out there, just throwing it out there. One thing that's very clear in the Bible, if you read it, not saying why, right, is that there was a huge amount of tension between Jesus and Mary. Right? I mean, and that comes across if you read the Gospels. Jesus and Mary didn't get along. Right? Jesus' first miracle is turning water into wine. And Jesus calls his mother woman. He says woman, right? There's another time where Jesus is preaching and his mother and brothers show up. And the mother and brothers show up and they say, "We want to see Jesus." And so they go to Jesus and they say, "Your mother and brothers are here." And he says, "My mother and brothers are those who come and follow me." And it's like, ooh, he did not want to see them. Now what's interesting about that particular passage about the mother and brothers is that Catholics and Orthodox folks maintain that Mary never had any other children, that she was a virgin her entire life. So who were the brothers, right? Who were the brothers? According to the Catholic tradition, Mary adopted a number of children after the birth of Jesus, because she was a good woman who loved people. And the brothers were other children, like orphan children she'd adopted. But it does say his brothers, right? So, that raises people to say, well, maybe Mary was not, a virgin her whole life. It was a virgin birth, but then after that or whatever. But the Catholic tradition maintains she was a virgin her entire life. She was the Holy Virgin. And there's multiple places where Jesus is kind of like, I don't really care for you much, Mary. There was tension between Jesus and his mother. That comes across vaguely in the Gospels. They never explain it, really. It's just something that is very much there if you look at it. In all four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it all comes across that Jesus and Mary didn't see eye to eye, which is interesting because that does go against Catholic teaching to some degree or other, because in the Catholic teaching, Mary is very, very sacred. Holy Mary, Mother of God, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. I mean, I have never been Catholic. And I just really, I don't pretend to understand Catholicism at all. I really don't. So it's not my field of expertise. But I do know that is one thing that comes across very clearly, is that there is very much tension between Jesus and Mary in the Bible. And it's vaguely defined. It's not clear what it's about, but there are a number of places where Jesus and Mary are interacting, and it's unpleasant. And then, so there you go. Gabby has another question. Gabby, you're on fire tonight. You're killing it. What is your next question, Gabby? What are your thoughts on the whole thing with Charlie Kirk's wife? What is the whole thing with Charlie Kirk's wife? All right. I've seen people like leaving comments about it and stuff. I saw her speak at the memorial where she forgave the shooter. But what's the latest? What is it? And I saw people saying things that looked awful. What's the story with Charlie Kirk's wife? Why does it? I mean, she had a husband. He got very brutally murdered, and the murder has turned into an ugly culture war. What's going on? I haven't followed what's going on with her. Her name's Erica, right? And she gave a speech at the memorial. She said she forgave the person who killed her husband. Is there more to it than that? What am I missing? Someone catch me up. What's the controversy? What's the controversy with his wife? Okay, I see people saying things. I see what you're saying, Gabby. I'm not going to repeat that on here because I don't feel right. This woman, I mean, her husband just died, and the internet is not nice. And, the internet is not nice, and her husband just died. And I see what people are saying, and I don't feel comfortable repeating that. I just don't, right? I don't know anything about it. I'll just be honest with you all. I have not heard these allegations and all that. I've not heard anything about it. But I know the internet is a very mean and nasty place, and her husband just got killed. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. No, it's okay, Gabby. I mean, I've seen it going around. People have left comments here. Erica, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what? And it's just like, but generally when you see how brutal that murder was and all that, the last thing I want to do is throw shade on a widow whose husband has just been killed in such a horrendous public way, right? The last thing I would want to do is, get up and say, wow, she's no good. Or I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. That's my position on that. I just don't feel like indulging anything negative people have to say about the widow Kirk. I'm just not gonna, I mean, who knows? Maybe there's something to what you're saying. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I'm not going to indulge it. Right. I just don't think that's helpful. And that's one of the problems with the internet is that, it's a place where, I don't know. I have been the victim of so much naysaying on the internet of people saying things that are absolutely outrageous about me and, inferring intent and, claiming all kinds of things about me. And so I just, when I see something like that, I just, look, I am the first one to say that the way people reacted to the murder of Charlie Kirk was sickening. And I've had so many people say, well, Caleb, he's bad. So what? And the people on the internet call me all the same names they call him constantly. Right. And it's just, my book about the years of lead proved to be more true than anybody estimated. I'll tell you that much. I was definitely right about the danger of an American years of lead, if ever. So yeah, but I'll look into it. Due Dissonance is a good show, and they tend to cover things and all that. But, my first reaction, I hear people speaking negatively of the widow Kirk, and I just think pivot. That's kind of my reaction, Gabby. I'm sorry I can't give you more of an answer than that, but that's just how it seems to me. I just feel like that's not something I can indulge. All right. Well, we're almost at the 3-hour mark. We're about 6 minutes shy of 3 hours. So again, if anyone has any more questions, now is the time. Now is the time. If someone wants to buy another coffee or whatnot, I'm not rushing to get anywhere. I can do another 5 minutes if I need to. Yeah, 3 hours is probably a good place to cut it because I do have an early morning errand to run in the morning, and there's another thing that's up in the air. And look, I mean, if I don't end up traveling, you all are going to miss out on a lot of mega streams. I kind of enjoy chopping the mega streams together. I'll be honest. I really do enjoy chopping them together. And I feel like that's one of the problems with YouTube is that something's on YouTube, it's new, and then it goes away. And unless someone goes looking for it, explicitly for it, you don't find it. And so that's what I like about doing these mega videos that I premiere is that you can see the old stuff. You can see the old stuff and it can premiere. So there you go. There you go. All right. Should I put on some music here for the last little bit? Should I find another song to put on? Should I put on another song? If anyone has any questions, send a buy me a coffee. Now would be the time to send it because we're getting close to the hour. And thanks for being here, you all. Not every night that I come on here, I have a big dynamic speech to make. Sometimes I come on here and I'm just tired and got allergies, but I just want to shoot the shit. And there's no one I'd rather shoot the shit with than all of you. I really do enjoy hanging out with all of you. And, it's always a pleasure to do that. So yeah, if you all are here and we're on here night after night, and that's great. And I like it. I'll put on Golden Mountain in Beijing. So yeah, if anyone's got any more questions, you can send them. I did see something else that I feel like reacting to. It's a tweet from the White House, and it came up, and I just, I don't know if we're going to play the whole thing, but I saw this, and I'm just like, come on. This is our politics getting weird. This is our politics getting weird. I must say, this is a video posted 4 hours ago to the White House's Twitter. And yeah, it's odd. Let me put it that way. Let's just watch it. This is a video from the White House.
Antifa beats journalists. Antifa attacks our police stations. They attack our courthouses. They dox our law enforcement officers. No more. They are a terrorist group, and we are coming after them.
We are here at the White House today to unmask Antifa, to follow the money all the way to the top. If you want to get to the bottom of who is fomenting this chaos and violence in our country, you must follow the money.
I was a mainstream reporter in Seattle for 10 years before I quit mainstream media, in part due to its refusal to acknowledge the dangers of Antifa and radical left-wing violence.
Part of the problem that we have is that a lot of people refuse to believe that Antifa is real, is just a made-up thing, but I have seen them. They are real, they are dangerous, and they are violent.
They are an organized, systemic, international criminal enterprise. And what the FBI is going to do is trace the money, follow the funds, and find every single person that was involved in funding the riots and the violent acts of criminality that they're perpetrating on our street.
I've watched Antifa brutally beat, harass, and threaten Americans in the street, but all of that ends with the Trump administration.
I was brutally attacked and almost killed by Antifa in the streets of Seattle. All of my colleagues have been attacked. I can't think of a single one who hasn't. Violence against journalists and police officers in our streets can't stand.
Just days ago, I was in the Portland jailhouse, and now I'm in the White House. This administration is built different, and Antifa's days are numbered.
And I want to thank President Donald Trump for designating Antifa a terrorist organization, and I'm looking forward to the FBI and the DOJ hunting down these people like the terrorists that they are.
All I gotta say, it's a bad day to be Antifa.
And Antifa's days of using violence and intimidation against their political opposition are over.
And I've continued to report on them over the years, despite the threats of violence and actual violence that's happened, because I owe a thank you to this country, the United States, for settling my parents who were victims of communism in Vietnam.
1 month ago, Charlie Kirk was murdered by a violent leftist. We all saw it, and we all saw thousands of leftists celebrate it. Antifa symbols were found on the bullet casings of the gun used to shoot and kill my friend.
We won't take it anymore. President Trump is not going to stand for it. And I'm so grateful that we have a leader in the White House that understands how we need to fight these sophisticated networks and how we need to take these terrorists out.
I've been attacked by Antifa, doxxed by Antifa, harassed by Antifa, but we're not standing down. We're now coming for you.
Oh my God. Welcome to American politics. I mean, that looked like an episode of Law and Order or something. I don't know. Is there an issue with left-wing people that are causing issues? Yeah. There's left-wing violence, sure. That's the politics of performance right there. I don't know. Look, I'm not a big fan of, I wasn't impressed with the Chaz in Seattle, wasn't impressed with it. And I'm, certainly not a fan of the people that were celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, but, this is, okay. Wouldn't it be nice if there was like a good side in American politics, right? That's what is so annoying about this. During Occupy Wall Street, it was really exciting to be part of Occupy Wall Street. Right now, I just look at so much of what's happening and I just go, ugh. I just look at that video and I'm like, ugh. And it's like, yeah, I kind of get what they're saying about there's these bad, obnoxious leftist people that are violent and think all Trump supporters are Nazis and stuff, and that's annoying, and I'm with them, and that they do illegal things and they're scary. Yeah, that's true. I'm also not thrilled with what ICE is doing. I'm also not thrilled with, the stupid anti-communism on there and how they think that the woke people are the same as China and Vietnam. And I look at all of this and I'm just like, oh my God. It's just like, ugh, yuck. Right. Yeah. Vietnamese communists didn't unalive Charlie Kirk. Exactly. Like, what in the hell? Anyway, yeah, I see that and I'm just like, I'm not cheering for that video. I'll tell you that much. Now, Marty Owen sent me buy me a coffee. He said crunchy or poofy Cheetos. I don't like Cheetos. I'll be honest with you. My wife likes Cheetos. She likes the poofy kind. And so when I'm buying stuff for my wife, when I'm out, I will pick up, one thing that's interesting is, in my neighborhood, the corner stores, often they don't, if you want to get, a particular kind of thing like poofy Cheetos, you have to get it while they have it because they only have it for a little while. So if I see poofy Cheetos, I will get them for my wife. She likes them. I'm just not a Cheeto guy. I will say though that, what was it? There was one of those junk foods that was very good. I can't remember what it was, but there was one of those junk foods that was kind of an obscure thing. It was like white I think it was maybe it was Cheetos. Was it white cheddar Cheetos? Was that what it was? White cheddar Cheetos or something? Like that was pretty clever. I actually enjoyed that. White cheddar Cheetos. I think I had that and that was pretty good. But so yeah, there you go. Yeah. It's all bad for you though, right? Eat fruits and vegetables, right? I like grapes. I really like grapes. And actually, over the last couple of years, I've learned to appreciate broccoli. I will say, broccoli, it actually, when you're a kid, you don't like it, but you boil the broccoli, that can be some pretty good stuff. Actually, and it's something about it. I don't know. It's weird. I've learned to appreciate some healthier food. It's kind of interesting. So yeah, there you go. All right, folks. Well, we are going to call it a night. Because it is late and I've got stuff to do in the morning and I don't know what my schedule is going to be and a lot on my mind. And I'll be back tomorrow night and Saturday night. Remember, we are having a call-in show on Monday. We're having a call-in show on Monday. So yeah, dare to struggle, dare to win. I'm putting on the closing music. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.